Good. All right. I'd like to call the June 24th, 2019 meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education to order. First up is to approve the minutes from the June 10th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Julie, second? Penny, all those in favor? Thanks. Next is to review and approve tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion? Katrina, second? Tiana, all those in favor? Thank you. Next is comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. So I'd ask that you just come up and state your name if you'd like to speak.
Hi, my name's Graham Lampton, and this is my son Charlie. We moved to Connecticut from the UK when Charlie was 8. He's now 14, and we chose New Canaan because of its world-class school system, and we've been really impressed with it. Charlie's a very diligent and hard-working student. He does very well at school, but over the past 2 years, as he's become a teenager, he's found it harder and harder to cope with the early starts. He's in bed by 9:30 p.m. without fail every night, yet he wakes up at 6 a.m. feeling exhausted before the day has even begun. He's fallen asleep in class from being so shattered. Every day he dreads going to school now because he's so tired. It builds through the week. By Wednesday he's emotional and finding it hard to cope, and by the weekend he is so exhausted he has no appetite for reading or sports or any of the things that kids should be doing at the weekend. His body is so used to waking up at 6 a.m. This continues at the weekend, so he never gets a lie-in, never catches up, and come Sunday night he's dreading the week ahead as he's so exhausted before it's even begun. As each semester progresses, the tiredness builds and gets worse and worse and worse. Teens need more sleep, and they need it later in the sleep cycle. We're so concerned about the effect on Charlie's well-being that we're considering moving away from New Canaan to another district that has embraced all the scientific findings and positive feedback from other districts that have introduced later start times. Those districts have seen improvements in everything from student exams, results and grades, school sports team performance, and also reductions in accidents from students who drive to school. It just makes sense for teenagers. Charlie tells me of other friends who are so stressed and overwhelmed with fatigue that they're having mental health issues, including anxiety, stress and depression. We owe it to our children to give them a safe learning environment that cares for their well-being above any logistical challenges. What is the point in us having a world-class school system in our town if our kids are so shattered they dread having to get up and go to school every day? They should be enjoying the best days of their lives, not breaking down because they're too tired to get through the day. Please do the right thing by the children of our wonderful town before tiredness turns into a tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Eric Mohammed. I've been a resident of New Canaan for 14 years. This is the first board meeting I've ever come to. And the reason I came here is because it's really such an important issue. I had 2 children in the school system. I say had because now I have one. One of the reasons I pulled my daughter out of the school system here in New Canaan and sent her to a private school was because of later school times. So it's real, it's actual, it is impactful. And I think if you take a step back, okay, take a step back and you look at this problem, it's not even a problem, if you look at this issue, there really should be absolutely unequivocally no debate, none whatsoever. Our children's health takes priority over everything and anything. It doesn't matter about after-school sports. It doesn't. It doesn't matter about if there's an issue with a teacher. I feel sorry about a teacher who may have a schedule change that might impact their life. But that does not take priority over our children's health. It doesn't really make a difference to me if someone is tied up on South Avenue in extra traffic because there's extra school buses that are all leaving at the same time. Take a step back and think for just 1 second, what takes priority over your children's health? Your children's health. Would you vote for something that would take priority or not take priority, over your children's health? Of course you wouldn't. Not as a parent, not as a father, not as a mother, an aunt or an uncle, whatever you want to call it. This is an easy decision for you guys to make. It shouldn't be debatable. We have a school system, we have children here are being affected by a school system start times. Is the budget going to go higher? It sure is, right? This is one of the wealthiest towns in Fairfield County, heck, the entire country. We can afford to do it. And if you people don't want to live in this town because the taxes went up, well, they can leave. But I'm sure as heck going to bet there'll be a lot more people who are going to stay in the town and keep their children in the town and move to the town because of the later start times. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill Flynn. I'm here as a lifelong resident of New Canaan. I moved back to New Canaan about 25 years ago and raised my 3 kids here. And last Wednesday, my youngest daughter graduated from New Canaan High School. Thank you very much.
Congrats.
But anyway, it's here. I'm here in my role as a pediatrician. And I just had a story to relate to if there's any question about this one particular issue. And then in those 20, 25 years, things change. And one real change that I noticed in those 20 years occurred a bunch of years ago. And I was reminded of it when I started seeing the great work that the Committee for Later School Start Times was doing. And I don't think there's anyone in the room or in the town that asks more parents of New Canaan children and more New Canaan children about their sleep habits than pediatricians do, right? All day, every day. And at one point, part of my routine with the teenagers is not, you need to get more sleep because that's a blah, 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 right? So I get very specific. What time do you go to bed on an average school night? And what time do you get up? And after you've done it 1,000 times, all you have to hear is that first number. And you know you're launching into your more sleep talk with them. But at one point, I started doing that. And I said, wait a minute, you're getting an, oh, you live in Wilton. And it was true, right? My patients who live in Wilton get more sleep on an average night, the teenagers, than other kids. They're not up doing cello lessons or push-ups or Latin declensions. They're sleeping more. And that, as somebody alluded to, is because of the natural sleep habits of teenagers. So, in my experience, it's a very real thing. You won't be making a mistake. As other people mentioned, there are major health issues, implications that come with too little sleep, and this is a real concrete thing that we can do in our town to improve our teenagers' lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Mary Summers, and I reside off Cheese Spring Road. We moved here 3 years ago. My family and I moved here 3 years ago, with our number one criteria being the education. Through our research, we felt confident that New Canaan was the place for our children to be. There's no argument our children are getting a great education, but after experiencing a year with our son waking up at 6:10 and catching the bus at 6:45, and knowing that we know now, we definitely would have considered a different school district. When my son started 7th grade last year, I really watched him slowly become sleep deprived. As I said earlier, Jack wakes up at 6:10 to catch the bus by 6:45 at 12 years old. He's still just a baby in my eyes. As it currently stands, our daughter Lily will be doing the same thing in a couple years. We've all read countless studies on the impact of sleep deprivation on kids, how their body clocks set are from them to stay up later and wake up later. So I don't need to revisit these studies. To provide another point of view, I would just like to call attention to the potential for families to choose to live in neighboring towns with later school start times. Speaking on behalf of myself, I would have definitely chose Wilton after my son experienced in 7th grade here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane Benton. I live at 106 Adams Lane. And I don't have too much to say, but I did bring a picture. And I just wanted to show you all this picture of my son getting on the bus at 6:50 a.m. And it was like, I think it was March 3rd. I was watching him get on the bus because it was a beautiful moon out. And actually, I was taking a picture of the moon. And the moon is right there above the bus, and it was providing really the only light. So just to kind of show everybody here, if you look really carefully, you can see him climbing on the bus, only with the light of the open door on there. For me, that's scary. I don't like even my 15, 16-year-old standing out there at the end of the driveway in the pitch dark with garbage trucks and landscape trucks and a lot of traffic there standing at the end of the road. So I just wanted to give you another perspective of why I, as a parent, am concerned. So thank you.
Hi. This moment just kind of reminded me how hard it is to come up here and speak and share your thoughts, and how brave so many people have been in just tackling public speaking, which isn't everybody's kind of forte. I'm sitting here and a woman passed down a note to me and said, "Can you just share this with the Board of Ed?" So I said, sure. Christina Eltier lives here in New Canaan, and she said, really short and sweet, "My 7th grader has missed first period at least a dozen times. And the time she went, I asked what you learned in social studies. She said, I don't know, I couldn't listen because I was so tired." And she really wanted that message to just be put across tonight so that everybody could hear that from someone who didn't really want to come up and speak tonight. So thank you.
Thanks.
So I think one of the hardest parts of the decision you have to make is well summarized by a quote that was either from a great physicist or Yogi Berra.
Can you just state your name?
Oh, sorry, Philip
Thanks.
Faris.
Okay.
Again, quote either by a great physicist or Yogi Berra, depending who you believe, but in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So you could sit down and say, children need 10 to 12 hours of sleep. It doesn't really matter if they're going to school at 7 or 8 or 9, as long as they get to bed on time. But then when you run the math and say, my high school student, rising high school student, thanks again to the middle school for doing such a great job with her, she has to be up in school at 7:30, that means up at 6:30. To get 10 hours of sleep, that's in bed at 8:30 p.m. We run a pretty tight schedule at home, but there's no way we get to bed at 8:30 with, she doesn't do sports, but I know people have sports. You have, music commitments, you have all of your homework load. And when you look at the difference between younger children and older children, the load that the children tend to have to bear in the afternoon, because we are, an electrified society, you've got lights on all the time, you've got a schedule that we all live that's more balanced when we have lots of work to do towards the afternoon and the evening hours. The practical aspect of this is that younger children have less to do in the afternoon, older children have more to do in the afternoon. So again, well, in theory, it doesn't matter when you start. Practically speaking, it seems to make a lot more sense to have the older children starting later so they have more time in that afternoon to accomplish that greater load that they need to do. Then you get more balanced bedtimes and I think a more satisfied student body, a more well-rested student body. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Oh.
Hi, I'm Gabby Beecher. I just wanted to share, so my 7th grader, rising 8th grader, mentioned to me a bunch of times this year. So language arts was her first period class at Saks. And her language arts teacher would comment frequently how no one spoke, that they were so quiet. And that his later period language arts classes were far more engaged and he couldn't really reel them in. And she said, we're just too tired. It's just, and even what they were saying, trying to get them to bed, even when I get her to bed, if I walk into her room at 10 o'clock at night, she's laying there in the dark with her eyes open because she's just not tired yet. So, I feel like I know it's a really hard thing to try to juggle all of this, but I think these kids really are struggling a lot. And I think the fact that this many people are here on June 24th is probably a sign of that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight and speaking and listening to what we have to say. We're going to take our next topic, which is our solar power purchase agreement, and then we'll get to the start times presentation. Mr. Rinelli.
And as Mr. Rinelli comes to the mic, just to let the board and everyone know that he is currently on vacation, but agreed to come down for us to run through this with us. He's an attorney with Shipman & Goodwin, a very well-regarded one, and we're grateful for your time. But please know that that is why we agreed to have Mr. Rinelli up first. So,
thank you, and I took my coat off. I hope that's allowed.
Yeah.
No, thank you, members and public. I know I'm intervening in between comment and presentation on a topic that's important to everyone, so I will try to be direct, but answer questions if I've left anything out. So I've been working with Joanne Keating to review a power purchase agreement for a 325 kilowatt solar array that will be installed at the South School by a vendor. This type of agreement is called a power purchase agreement. I'm not sure if the Board of Ed has entered into one previously, but it's a common way of procuring solar power that has some advantages in terms of the Board of Ed not incurring any upfront costs. In return, they buy power from the array, and the installer, the vendor, makes their money on the purchase of the solar power. That's the general framework. So to be clear, the power purchase agreement is a contract. For the lawyers in the room. It has a 20-year term. It sets forth the price to purchase the power at $0.044 per kilowatt hour, which is, I think, probably the Board of Ed is paying 16 or 17 cents now a kilowatt hour. So at a significantly lower rate. I think that's an all-in price, including transmission and distribution charges. So you pay a lower rate, you achieve some savings, the vendor gets a profit from selling you all of the power that the system produces over the 20-year period. There are some obligations. You have to, for example, keep the system on the roof of the school for 20 years, and there are obviously penalties or default if that doesn't occur. The other, important terms I would say for this agreement are there is a right for the Board of Ed. So under this agreement, also to be clear, you are not purchasing the solar panels. So you'll drive into the school, you'll see the solar panels on the roof, and it will read as if, oh, those are the school solar panels, but they're not. What you're really doing is you're licensing the space on the roof to a vendor. They buy the panels, they install the panels, and they own the panels for the life of the contract. And then at the end of the term, you either extend to a renewal term or they have to take them down. So you don't own them. The other thing that the Board of Ed doesn't own, although I think a lot of schools still feel like this fits within their mission, you don't technically own the environmental attributes. If you think of those as the sort of greenness of the panels that, everyone wants to say, well, we're reducing our our carbon footprint. Those benefits do occur, but now, these days, those benefits have monetary values, and so the vendor gets those, and they monetize those in the form of renewable energy credits and potentially other types of monetizing opportunities for those attributes. So that's the trade-off. You're not paying for anything up front. You pay as you go for the power at a rate that's lower than you currently pay, but in return, you don't own it. They essentially get essentially a free license of the roof, and they own the sort of green environmental attributes. The other terms I think that are important is there are insurance requirements, so the vendor does have to carry insurance on the system in case anything goes wrong with it. The school also has to carry some insurance of its own, just general liability insurance. That's all set out in the contract. There is also a purchase option. If after 6 years, there's 3 intervals, 6 years, 10 years, and 15 years, the Board of Ed has an opportunity to buy the system, and there's a price schedule for those purchases. And that is, for example, if you decided you wanted to do something different with the school, or you needed to take the system down for some unexpected repair work, you might want to consider, is it cheaper to buy the system when you do that work than to continue to pay the vendor? So those are the Board of Ed's option. There's not the vendors. Your option to purchase at those intervals. The Board of Ed is not obviously responsible for any property tax, but again, remember, you don't own the hardware, so it is personal property. So if there is any property tax assessment on that property, it's the vendor's obligation to pay that. And I think the other thing I would say is, this morning, Dr. Keating and others presented this to the Board of Selectmen to get their preliminary approval of the agreement and authorize the Board of Ed to enter into it, which the Board of Selectmen did, subject to, I think, viewing the final document. So what would be left is for us to continue the negotiation of the final contract. There are a couple of terms we still need to work out, including refining the non-appropriation clause. And then there would be, we would present the final proposed contract to the Board of Ed for approval, and once that's approved, it would go back to the Board of Selectmen for final sign-off, and then the contract would be entered into.
As the resolution read this morning, the selectmen basically have approved the agreement and have deferred to the Board of Education to finalize the final terms. So they have authorized Kevin Moynihan to sign off once the board has signed off. So I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
And are we trying to do that tonight based on this draft, or?
No.
Yeah, we have a few outstanding terms, the non-appropriation being the largest, the biggest issue that we have with the contract. We're confident that we can resolve that particular issue. The other terms are minor in nature. I would say they're more language related, which we can also resolve. The way the Board of Selectmen approved the resolution, however, is that it has to come back to the board. So we wanted to talk to you about that after you have your questions answered by Matt Rinaldi.
Okay, great. Questions? Penny?
So I was just curious, just in terms of commercial reasonableness of the agreement, I was curious, how long does it take for the Davis Development to sort of make their money on the deal?
Well, it's different in every contract, but the general scheme, I can tell you, and, but don't hold me to the precise timelines. There are tax incentives in addition to the rec values and other things that make this type of financing more suitable to a private entity than to like a Board of Ed, because you can't benefit from them. So generally, the rule of thumb is with depreciation, tax incentives, and sale of energy and rec values, those income streams all coming in. I think most vendors would tell you they get their sunk costs out of the system in the first 6 to 8 years or so, maybe more if it's a difficult install. I mean, they are taking some risk, and that's why a lot of them have this purchase option beginning after year 6, because truthfully, they're not opposed to selling it if the host wants to buy it.
So, can I ask another one?
Go ahead.
Okay, so what can you tell us, if you know anything about Davis Hill Development and how good a partner they are for the Board of Ed and New Canaan to go into business with?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to speak on that. I mean, I've done a lot of solar work around the state, but I haven't worked with Davis Hill. I will say in my dealings with them thus far on the contract, I've been very impressed with how knowledgeable they are. But I know there was, as part of the RFP, there was some due diligence done on the bidders, and I would defer to Joanne and company for that. But I will say, so far they've been very good, very knowledgeable.
Sure, so we did vet out all of our bidders, the low three bidders on this job. And Davis Hill has experience in Milford. They've done 6 of their schools. They're doing another group of schools this summer, and they've done work in Fairfield as well. And they're going to be doing work in Ridgefield. So they have extensive experience down in Fairfield County with public schools. Financially, we did check out their financials, and they are capable of financing this project.
Other questions? Maria?
Is 20 years a typical term?
Is it what?
A 20-year term of agreement, is that what all the other districts are doing?
It's market. I mean, 15 years is the minimum, and there are some 15-year agreements. But I will say the vast majority of ones that I do, and I also see a lot. I'm outside of my work for Shipman and Goodwin, I'm on the board of directors for the Connecticut Green Bank, so I often see PPAs in that capacity, and 20 years is, I would say, the more typical length. The rec credits are 15-year contracts, so that's why I say that's the minimum. You could negotiate down, but if you do that, usually your cost of power goes up. So.
Yep, Sherry?
So given the 20-year term, and you mentioned the contract contains obviously obligations and penalties, are there any undue risks that you want to highlight for us, given the 20-year term?
Well, the first thing I usually ask for these types of projects is where is the roof of the building in its life cycle, because it would obviously be a problem to take down the system to redo a roof because it wouldn't be generating power during that time, and the contract says that in that case the host would have to pay for the power that's not generated, subject to a small allowance. But in this case, the South School is getting a new roof. So it's actually, I think, really the best case scenario is you're getting this installed. At the same time, you're getting a new roof, so there's less concern about those life cycles matching up. And in addition, I've been consulting with my colleague who's assisting on the roofing contract to make sure that we dovetail the two projects so that the warranty for the roof is not adversely impacted by the installation of the solar system. So there'll be the solar facility, there'll be a combined inspection after the completion of that system. So actually, it's a pretty good setup from that point of view. So the other risks really tend to be smaller. There's not a huge technology risk. I mean, solar is well established, passive technology. There are regular operation and maintenance work that needs to be done on things like replacing inverters, but that's pretty well scheduled and people know when that's, you can predict it. The only other risk would be some unexpected, event that causes damage to the system.
Yeah?
So I don't know how I have a few questions, but I don't know if you
Go
want
ahead.
me to do it. Okay. So I'm going to preface this with, I'm not an attorney, so
Okay.
if I have a misunderstanding, if you could clarify, that would be great. My first question is, in section 3.1-1, in the milestone section of the contract, it talks about that, they are going to be bidding for the tax credits, or the, whatever they call them.
Yes.
Yeah, they're tax credits, I mean. I used to work in affordable housing tax credits, so that's how I kind of almost see this as the same thing,
Yes.
only in solar panels.
Yes.
So it says that they will bid, and if they don't win the bid in the first round, they'll go into the second round. I'm a little confused because I thought there were already tax credits assigned. Is that true or not?
Yeah.
And
These are, you're not off with the analogy, but these are REC credits.
Okay.
Renewable energy credits, so they're given through the utility. It's a program that was required by the legislature, but it's not, same idea. There's a limited pool.
Yep.
And they sort of auction, there's an auction and you win. But yeah, before I was involved, the system was bid into the auction and was awarded credits. So really, this is one of the items that will be changed. It's really more an assignment of the credits that have already been awarded. Now, if you don't use the credits, you lose them. They go to somebody else. But, so yes, there's
Okay, so
not,
that's sort
there's
of a
no,
moot, it's a
no
little bit of a moot.
contingency needed here.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Just, who is ISO Northeast, I'm guessing is what NE
Yeah,
is?
ISO New England, so that's the grid operator. Years ago, when they restructured the electric industry to not deregulate, but, change, encourage competition, there's basically regional grid operators that sort of balance capacity and production to make sure there's enough electrons running to everybody who needs them. That's ISO's role. They're
Okay.
independent grid operator.
Okay. Also in section 4-2-2, I'm a little confused why we couldn't look at the meter without without the lender or the provider being there, or?
This is not just look, we can look at it any time. This is a witness test. This is, because just like you have an electric meter in your home and that measures how much you're using, that is the basis for your electric bill.
Right.
This is a meter that's going to be installed because this is not a utility, it's a vendor, they're going to install what's called a utility grade meter. And we want to have the right to make sure that meter's tested for accuracy from time to time, because these meters do need to be calibrated. And if it's out of accurate, it's not accurate within a certain degree, we want it calibrated. So we want to witness that test. So that's what we're talking about observing in that section.
But I think it says we can't do it at any other time without prior notice to the provider.
In 4.2.
I think that's right. I think I
I
wrote
think
the right
that's just
section.
the audit.
It's in the audit section, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's in audit and inspections. It's not just the audit.
It's once per calendar year and after reasonable written post shall have the right to
Right.
all such meeting.
Oh, okay.
It's just so that we
Okay.
can't audit it,
Okay.
once a month.
Okay.
So-
Yeah,
That's fine.
but the term access the
Okay.
meter, that means breaking the
Okay.
seal on it.
Okay.
That's not just taking a look at what it says.
Okay.
All these meters are sealed, so that's what they're referring to there.
Okay. And then does the provider, so if we generate more power than we need by the system, is the provider then reselling?
No. So the system is sized based on the load of the school. They take the annual load, not daily, and then they size the system. And I believe I asked Davis Hill, and I think they said this is sized at about 80% of load.
Okay.
And so you can, obviously, you generate more solar power during times of the year and days. So you basically, you just have to avoid being a net generator on an annual basis. So like on a given day in the summer, you might produce more, and that power goes up to the grid. They don't sell it. You get credit because the meter measures what's
Okay.
going up to the grid, and then on days where you use more, the meter rolls the other way. So net metering is what it's called, and that trues up once a year. There's a set date on which it trues up, and so as long as on that date, on an annual basis, you haven't generated more than you used, there's no extra power to sell. If you did, they still aren't selling it on the grid. What would happen is you would get credit for that power at the wholesale price of power, which is really not a good deal. I mean, it's nominal. But the point here being that at 80% sizing, you shouldn't have that, even if you do energy efficiency measures and program changes, et cetera. And that's pretty standard. That's a number I see in a lot of other PPAs.
And then how is fair market value determined in this? Because it's not a liquid asset, so I am actually a little concerned about, we have to pay the greater of the fair market value or the I would call it
termination value.
depreciated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel like that is not really advantageous to us as a board.
This is one of my pet peeves as well. I don't like it either, but it is market, and the reason is that as part of the tax credit availability that they're getting, these have to be real contracts. They can't be nominal. We'll sell it here for $1 once we've harvested the tax credits. So It is set out, there is a independent appraiser that will appraise the value. There's a dispute option, but it is the greater of the termination value or the fair market value, which does seem like heads I win, tails you lose, or vice versa. But the bottom line is, you won't, I mean, in a legal sense, you won't be paying more than fair market value, and that's what the law requires.
And so what happens if in the first 5 years there's a default by the provider and we don't have a termination value? They just go out and get the fair market value then? Because there's no termination values in the first 5 years.
If we default?
No, if they default.
If they default.
And we want to get out because they are in default of the contract, there's no termination values in the appendix.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's not clear. Do we have to pay fair market value? What happens in the first 5 years?
You know, I would presume what would happen is, first of all, we would have to bring a default action. There's an opportunity to cure all those things, but assuming you get beyond all of that, I think the default would be fair market value by an appraiser, because there would be the greater of, and there's none. The first 5 years is zero under the termination value.
Okay. Sorry, guys,
But I will take a look at that provision to make
That would
sure
be
that's
great.
buttoned up.
And then, I guess, another heads I win, tails you lose, or it feels a little lopsided. If there's a failure to perform by the provider, they get 30 days to cure. But if there's a failure to perform on our end, we get 10 days to cure.
Yeah, that's one of those language things that we do need to clean up. So this draft, we haven't accepted.
Okay.
And we want those default numbers to be more equitable, if not even. Usually, there should be a standard default period for both parties, and there usually is a small, if they use a bank or financer, usually there's another extended period for that party to cure, which, again, is a market term, term.
I actually thought we did have the same 30 days
No, it's
in 11.1.2.
In 11.2, it says 10, they get 30 days. In 12.2, it says 10 days.
Yeah, that's our remedies on so if you look at host of 11.1 versus 11.2, which I think are the mirror provisions, those are both 30 and 120 days, and then 12.1 is the remedies.
Okay, they still get 30 days and we get 10.
Okay. So this is where it's different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So host will have 30 days under 11.1.2. That's what you're referring to?
I guess it's more 12.1 and 2.
12.1. Remedies.
Well, host, yeah, the 12.12 is the provider remedies upon, and then let's see, 11.
Yeah, so if we default, if we stop paying, then they essentially give us 10 days notice. And
I just think that should be even.
Yeah.
That should be even. It shouldn't be.
We'll
Yeah.
work on making those more balanced in the.
And then this is my final question. I know you're all thrilled.
This is great. For me.
It's been a long time since I've had to do this kind of work. In the Appendix B, Schedule B, Appendix 1 of Schedule B, it's just, I'm a little unclear. Does the language in the technical specification, because this is a little frightening to me, it says, provider reserves the right to install substitute equipment based on the state of market and technology conditions immediately prior to procurement. So that's the opening sentence. Now, I see the technical specs, and in the second two bullets under that says or equivalent. Does that language apply? Usually the language is above the, I want to make sure that they have to provide something that is equivalent and that we have recourse if they don't.
We can, so we can put in here, this is not uncommon, but it's certainly negotiable. We can put in subject to approval by, we can designate who, we don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want them substituting equipment that we're not okay with.
Yeah.
Right, if I may, the spec specified Class 1, and there's a list of Class 1 voltaic panels.
Okay.
And so we did leave it open for them to provide us with what they were going to provide and to make sure that it was on that list. So they can move within that list if they decide that they can buy a Class 1 for a different price.
So does this language protect us in that? Because
So we-
as I read it, I was
Yeah.
concerned.
I think,
Yeah, it
I
is
think
a-
what we'll try to do is refer to the list
It's a-
here. In other
Okay.
words, alternatives
All right,
off of the
perfect.
list attached.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Penny?
Can you just talk a little bit about the maintenance shutdown allotment and whether it rolls over and how reasonable it is? Because this is sort of like if the roof fails, if we stop, for some reason, can't, keep up with our end of the bargain.
Yeah. So one of our requests to them is to convert that table of the allotment into average days, so we have a better sense of how much that is. I haven't converted the kilowatt hours into days there. But the provision itself is a pretty good one. I mean, we'll work on the numbers to make sure it's adequate, and we'll talk to your facilities personnel to sort of get a sense of how many days we need. But the idea that first of all, a lot of PPAs don't provide that O&M, if you will, O&M bonus, and a lot of them don't let you roll it over. So the language of it is good, but what we haven't worked out and what we're waiting to get back from them is how many calendar days that equals on a rough average basis, and then we'll with staff see if that's adequate.
And I don't, maybe this might be getting too technical, but as I understand South School roof, it's about 16 or 17 different roofs. So I could see where we have, we might have a problem with part of it, not with others of it. And I just presume there's some way that this can be allotted if we have part of the roof functioning and part not functioning.
Well, it is. So the way these systems are installed, they don't go, in the old days, like the whole row would go down if you had to maintain 2 or 3 panels at the end. So there are enough inverters here that doesn't happen. So you could work on a portion of the system on an area of roof, and the rest of the system could still be generating. So that's why it's good to have it in kilowatt hours, because you're only losing that production from that area that you're working on. So that will, you don't have to use up all your hours because the rest of the system's shut down. So that sort of balkanization of the system around the roofs could actually make it easier to do the O&M.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just a
Yes.
general one.
Sorry.
Is there anything we missed? What should we have asked you that we don't know to ask you?
boy.
And you could and you
That's
go,
totally
well,
unfair,
I skated on that one.
Oh, you want the secret list?
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's stuff in here about financing and bankruptcy that always is worrisome. Frankly, bankruptcy is really the biggest thing that keeps me up at night with these systems, if the vendor goes bankrupt. But that's why we check out the financials and, do the best we can do. But I think you've really hit a lot of the right questions. I mean, the only other issue I sort of had notes on was there's obviously going to be an interconnection agreement required with the utility once the system's built. Again, that's a standard agreement. The utility won't negotiate that agreement, but it basically sets forth the rules for how the system has to interface with the grid and that it can be disconnected in the case of an emergency, et cetera. So there's not much we can negotiate in that area, but that's the only topic that your questions haven't raised that I have on my list.
Maria?
Sorry. Is there any provision for new technology? Say something happens in 5 years that allows you to generate, more electricity. 20 years is a long time in technology.
It's a long time. Yeah. No. Other than nothing prevents the vendor from coming in with new technology, because remember, they get paid only when electricity is being generated. But on the other hand, there's a cap. In other words, they can't come in and say, look, we're going to generate twice as much power, and by the way, you're going to buy it, because we don't need it, at least not at this location. So there is not, the vendor could come in and say, we have, we're replacing things, inverters, and they're a little more efficient. So that may happen, sort of incremental changes, but not really sea changes and improvements.
But we would also have the option to buy it. So if we came up with, you know, some great new opportunity or the world did, and we wanted to go buy the, you know, 10 years out, go buy the system back, we could do that under this agreement, right?
Right, right.
Or 6, right? 6
Yeah,
years.
6,
is the
10,
first.
yeah, exactly. Tiana?
So I guess to kind of follow on to Penny's comment about what else have you seen? Is it typical to see the same rate for 20 years? And I ask that because the technology is improving. Unlike oil where you're drilling and it's expensive, I'm assuming that technology will make this cheaper and cheaper over 20 years. In the other contracts that you see, is it common to see no deflation in the price of the generation?
Yeah, well, I wish I could take credit for this, but it was in there before I arrived on the scene. But there's no escalator, and what I see in a lot of other contracts are escalator provisions at 1 or 2%. I've never seen one with a reduction because it's keyed off of what their costs are, capital costs up front. But a lot of them have 2% escalators, which is a mystery to me, because once it's up there, they're not doing a lot of work. So this one doesn't have it. That's a pretty good deal to lock in your power. I mean, I always tell people that a lot of schools want to do this for savings, but I think the other reason to do it is stability. Like schools make budgets, and they aren't very good at accounting for increases. So now you're going to really lock in your energy costs for your budgeting purposes year over year for a 20-year period. And savings aside, that's pretty good because you can then get, you know how much to budget for it.
And it pays for our new roof.
Yes.
I'll remind everybody.
Yes.
Any other questions? I just had a couple. First on the document in 7.2.2, the maintenance of interconnection. Is it typical for that to be our responsibility? And is that problematic at all? Does the interconnection ever go down, or is that pretty straightforward?
That's typical. In other words, what they're saying is you can't shut down the school. I mean, if the system, the grid goes down or there's a physical problem, that's not what this is addressing. This is if you stop using the school and therefore you tell the utility to come and disconnect the meter, we don't need it anymore. Because that's their lifeline to get the net metering power up to the grid.
Right, okay, I got it. And then the second one was just the definition of provider. It's pretty basic, but it runs throughout the entire document, and it's pretty broad. So I would just want to make sure that, we look at that and make sure that the provider, Davis Hill, can't, pawn off all their obligations on somebody else. We don't have them to look to. So maybe this is typical language, but I just want to make sure that it's.
Yeah, I will look through here, but there should be somewhere in this contract that nothing, none of the provisions that allow them to use subs and agents relieves them of their obligations. So I'll make a note, and maybe I'll move that to the provider section.
Okay, thanks. And then the last one was just on Davis Hill. We looked at their financials, but do you have a sense as to how much debt versus equity financing that they've used in the past?
I don't. I haven't, the sort of business side of this, I haven't really been involved on.
I can get that for you.
Okay,
We have it
great.
back in the office.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, we'll send it around to everybody.
All right. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up is our school start times presentation by Dr. Lutzy.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Let's see here. Hold your breath. You can fire it up. All right, let's.
That would be weird.
Did we connect? Okay. should be good. All right. Well, as the projectors warm up, I want to first say thank you to everybody for coming out tonight, for sticking around. As I mentioned, Matt is an attorney with Shipman and Goodwin, which also means that we pay him by the hour. So I didn't want to say that with him here, but thank you for allowing us to adjust the schedule so we could hear from Matt first. And thank you to the board as well. As we begin, I want to start also by saying thank you to the team over at Hanover. It's Kate Keller and Mary Kate Taylor. I've been working with Jill and me on the phone for the last couple of years now, working through different things. They've come out to visit. I imagine they may even be watching tonight because they are interested in the results of the survey as well, and the analysis and the ensuing discussions. So thank you to them, and thank you for their great work they do on our behalf. As you know, the district's been engaged in student health and wellness initiatives for a long time. And in the last couple of years, the school start and end times discussion and consideration has been one dimension of these efforts. Tonight, we're going to go through the feedback from the survey. And as we do that, I urge the board and everyone to think about it in that context of student health and wellness, and as a strategy for our district to help possibly improve on that. But also to keep in mind that in and of itself, school start and end times is not a solution, it's a strategy. And we want to always be sure that we keep kind of our eye on the goal, which is to help to improve and strengthen our students' health and wellness as they go through our system, and really to design a system or to adjust the system to ensure that it is doing all it can, it's optimized to help benefit every single child in our system. So as we talk about school start and end times, we talk about all kinds of dimensions and elements and the complexity of that we've talked about for months, thinking about it in the context of our elementary students, our middle school students, our high school students, and sort of plugging it into the student experience as they go. I also want to just mention while I'm here that the board, the district have been working on many initiatives focused on student health and wellness, because really it's an adaptive problem, right? Student health and wellness, when we think about that. We talk a lot about stress students are under. We talk a lot about the pressure students feel. Those are things that if there was one quick way to fix that, we'd all do that and feel really good about it. But it's really a much more complex adaptive problem. We have to look at the technical dimensions of our school system, and the technical aspects of running a school. We need to work on the adaptive dimensions, the things that impact the hearts, minds, and practices of the people that are within the system. And so to begin, when systems focus only on the technical, or they lose sight of those adaptive challenges, which are messy problems, they're more difficult to work through, because again, when you're working with sort of beliefs and hearts and minds of people, we have to go at it in a variety of different ways. If you systems that apply technical solutions to adaptive problems most often fail. They flounder, they struggle, and ultimately, whatever they're trying to accomplish doesn't happen. And typically what happens instead is the people they're trying to serve wind up being ill-served and really the ones who pay the price. So in that context, I also want to say thank you to the board and to the district and to everybody for being so thoughtful and deliberate throughout this process. It is, again, piece of the big puzzle. Tonight we're focusing on that piece, and I'm glad to, and we've got some really, I think, interesting results to talk about and feedback, and I think it will launch us into a great discussion. You as a board, and certainly us as an administrative team, we've been having those discussions. But we also want to keep our eyes on the biggest prize of all, the purpose of what we're doing, which is to help design the system to ensure that our system is optimized to most benefit every student that's a part of it. Okay? So some of those things I mentioned, the things that we've been doing, and again, I'm going to go through this very quickly. You have the hard copy of the slides in front of you, and there's about 57 of them. I promise you some of these will be very quick. But again, it's an important topic, so I want to make sure we do it justice. In the larger context, we've been looking at scheduling, school start and end time. We've been talking about master schedules. There's a group of teachers here at the high school that have gone out a couple of different times to buildings that are running different variations of a master schedule. We've looked at block scheduling. They're looking at some modified blocks. They're bringing that feedback back to each other. So that's ongoing work. We're also always looking at that at our elementary schools, at middle school. Is there a better way to do this? We're looking at our exam schedules. We're talking about advanced placement courses. Bill Egan talked about this a little bit when he was here with Jill, and they were talking about the test results. We're looking at homework, balancing it more across the disciplines, and really clarifying our expectations and the purposes of homework. And those discussions are ongoing with the staff. The project-based learning work that we continue to do with our curriculum experts and others. Looking at cross-curricular projects, school-wide experiences like our sophomore simulation, other things that our kids do. This expansion the last couple of years in STEM and computer science, other things that are going on. We're working in assessment. We're working on school climate. We're working on the vision of the graduate, looking at the way that we communicate with the community to make sure that there's an open dialogue back and forth between us. All of these things are all going on, and at least part of it is a contributing factor to developing the system that cares for and nurtures all of our children as they go through that. So again, school start times is an important piece of that, but rest assured that there's lots and lots of work going on, really designed to optimize this system. And I think it's a comprehensive approach to our wellness across K-12. And I didn't even talk about the work we're doing with our staff, where we have our wellness committee. You've heard a little bit about that. The wellness fair that we had, some of the other things that are going on. Because school is a community, and everybody is a part of that. And we all contribute to the quality of the experience together. The school start and end times itself. Page up top is the page on the website, and I do encourage folks to go take a look if you're interested in getting a little more granular about the work that's been done to date. But as we go back, thinking about this over the weekend a bit, it's been a busy couple of weeks here with graduation last week on Tuesday, then on Wednesday, and everything else we've done. So reflecting over the weekend on this, thinking it really began, there was a group that was talking in town. They contacted me, said, hey, we're interested in this and would like to talk to you about it further, and actually let me know about a conference that was going on in Washington, D.C., and I went down and learned quite a bit there, and we began looking into this, as a district and a board back, I guess about 2 years ago. I'm not meant to bring up the dates, but it's all on the website. And we began talking with others and learning from folks who were going through different things. And the board committed last summer to a district goal that we would continue to research this and look at bringing forward some scenarios, which is what we've been doing. We've had some partners along the way, as you know, with the Transportation Advisory Services, TAS, who helped design some of those scenarios. We've been working very closely with Hanover, reviewing the research. There's a ton of it out there, going to more conferences, such as the one up at Trinity, hosted by a professor from Harvard, and some other folks. We've been meeting with faculty and staff. The faculty here at the high school has put a group together to do some research as well. So there's been quite a bit going on. Again, not to rehash all of what happened. But about a year ago, we also performed a survey through Hanover for the whole community to get some feedback about what were the items of consideration. If the board were to continue to analyze this and take a look, what are some of the things that community, it was parents, staff, students, felt were things that worthy of consideration by the board in making the decision. So this quick slide is just a reminder about that June 2018 survey. The results were shared about a year ago. And the number one sort of consideration was that research on adolescent sleep. Whoops. I wasn't supposed to do that. The second was time for homework. So you see some of these others. The research that we did a year ago helped inform the development of the questionnaire, the survey instrument that was administered this May. So sort of one thing has led to the next, and now we're able to get more granular because in the course of this year, we learned from TAS what some of the scenarios could look like. They did that deep analysis of our transportation system and talked to folks to learn about kind of how our system all works, and then that was shared again with the board, with the community, with teachers at each of the buildings, and open discussions. So we developed the survey for this year, which had three main goals: to determine perceptions, stakeholder perceptions of the current schedule, of potential alternative school schedule options, and then the perceived impact of different school schedule options on the district stakeholders. And the list of those areas under consideration for impact in part came from the survey that we administered a year ago, because people had identified those as important for us to think about. Okay. So this year's survey, let's start by looking at who responded. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on. Right. We had over 3,500 respondents. It was students grades 7 through 12. It was parents, guardians across the district, staff across the district, and also the community. The staff were certified and non-certified, and you see that for a total of 549 of the 3,518. So approximately 74% of students in grades 7 through 12 responded, which is a pretty good response rate, although we wanted a little bit higher because we actually gave them time in school to do it. I'm not going to question it was the end, they must have been doing something else. That's all right, we understand. The certified staff numbers, 95% of our certified staff responded. That's certified across the grades K-12. 92% of our administrators responded. 46% of our non-certified staff responded, which I think those numbers, 95, 92, 46%, really impressive. Shows both a level of engagement with the discussion that's going on and a desire to have a voice. And I think a very impressive 60% of our households responded. So family, families, 60% of our families responded. This is approximate because they use the term for me today. They sometimes Brady Bunch the families, as as families may blend in different ways, but they gave me the number, and 60% of households is a good number to use. And we had about, sorry. I'm still figuring out Keynote here. All right. We had about 115 community members, I believe it is. So, good number of folks. Typically in survey research, you're targeting, if you hit 20% of anticipated respondents, you're doing very well. I look at Katrina because I think you did market research in the past. To hit 60% of our homes and 95% of our certified staff and just about 50% and 46% of our non-certified staff, I think that the results are very, very sound. The community members, of course, that's the toughest group to motivate, but to have 115, I think it's certainly a lot more than we did last time, a year ago, and again, shows people's involvement with it. The distribution of respondents is also important to consider. So taking a look at it all, parent and staff respondents were balanced across the grades. You see the high school, the middle school, there's a spike in the number of respondents. That's our students. Because again, after our conversation with the board, it was grades 7 through 12 who responded. The 36% of the staff, 39% of the parents are at the elementary level. And then if you dig into it a little bit deeper, you see those percentages, and it's a little fuzzy for me, I don't know. There we go. 34%, 27% at the high school, which I think makes sense because parents of seniors who might be the last student are not necessarily as motivated to respond to something like this in the high school. But well balanced across the grades. We also asked the question for our respondents from families, how many of your children attend New Canaan? Of the 1,390 that responded, you see the percentages. And as one of 4 boys in my family, I shout out to the 4 or more families there. Very busy households, I'm sure. But your child or your current grade level, again, that's important, I think, for the balance right across the grades. Again, you see it's 4%, 3% for our parents across all of those grades. Again, the spike is there because of the students that have responded. And then the grade level that you work with for our staff, our certified staff, and you can see the distribution there. And then the last demographic sort of look before we go into some of the other pieces. For our community members, most of them live near a school, so that could be the motivation for responding, certainly. And you see the distribution there. There were questions also that asked if they sponsor or are involved with a non-school extracurricular activity. 15 respondents said that they were. And then the grade level of most of the participants in that activity. and 15 responded as well. Again, that comes from the survey from a year ago, where the access to and availability of the activities outside of school was an important consideration by respondents in the community. A concern was raised early about the education of the respondents, and I think it was wise to raise that concern. We wanted to make sure that folks who were responding had a knowledge base from which to do so. So we did create a couple of videos. We worked to make sure our website was as complete as could be, added more external links to different resources for people who may be interested in learning more. And I was quite glad to see that most participants, 95%, responded either neither agree or disagree, or that they didn't have an opinion on whether or not they knew enough to answer the survey. So if people clicked on strongly disagree, or neither disagree or agree when asked the question if they had enough information to respond, it brought them to a page that invited them to click on the link to go to the website, to learn more, to look at the information that's there, and then invited them to come back when they're ready. So it opened in a separate window. They could go back and just continue the survey when they were ready to go. If they hit agree or strongly agree, they could move right through. Okay. So the scheduling options that were sort of used throughout the survey, we had talked about together and sort of identified which ones folks were comfortable with using and putting out there based on the research from TAS and the conversations that had occurred in the past. The first, of course, is our current schedule, which is the 3-tier starting at 7:30 with the high school and SAC 7-8, and the third tier starting at 9:05. Whoops. Okay. The next was the 2-tiered schedule. As you'll recall, that's the 8:15 to 2:50 with half the school, half the district instead of a third, and then the other half going later at the 9:10. The 3-tiered version 1, which I think of as the flip, just to keep it easy for myself, which is we're taking the current first tier and second tier and flipping them. All other things stay the same. The 3-tiered version 2, which is in some ways the most significant of them all, or, well, the 2 tiers probably that. But the 3-tier version 2 groups the 3 elementaries in the first tier, high school alone in the second, and then all of SACs together in the third. And then the 3-tiered version 3 is in response to the question about what if no school began before 8 o'clock, what would that look like? And tried to work that through. So as the high school alone at 8 o'clock, 3 elementaries at 8:45, then SACs together at the 9:30 start. So those are the versions or the scenarios that were shared throughout the survey for folks, for respondents to consider and to provide anticipated feedback on. I want to go back, just as we go into this, to go back to the guiding principles that came out of the focus group. As you'll recall, we had a meeting here. We had about 38 people, if I remember correctly. We tried to have a representative stakeholder group of board members and administrators and teachers and parents and folks and others. And some of the takeaways from that were just, there were some guiding principles. Again, it's all available on the website. But some of the things that came out, I think that are just good to remind ourselves of. Questions about waiting for the bus in the dark for kids of different ages, especially those that might bike or walk to school, and especially for our youngest ones. We saw a picture tonight about the dark bus stop. Different traffic zones throughout town. Certainly we are with the intersection right here on Farm and South, that it is a significant intersection for commuters and others, so being aware of that. But I think most importantly, they talked about the acceptable amount of time for bus rides in the morning for kids. There was considerable conversation about that. And there was a feeling that 30 minutes for an elementary school student, 35 minutes for 5th and 6th grade, and 45 minutes for 7th through 12 was about the upper limit of where folks were comfortable going. The little bit longer for the 7th through 12 age, and also with an understanding that as they're dropped off in the morning, they have to go to their lockers and do some things versus the younger kids who get dropped off with their backpacks and go right to their classroom. Currently, the latest start we have, as you know, is 9:05, and the general consensus of that focus group was they felt pretty strongly that should be the latest start time. More conversation, though, from the focus group that came out, and the last piece was the latest time home. Right now, the latest students from East and West, that's our third tier, get home at around 4:15, 4:20. And people were encouraging us in any scenario that's developed to try to stay to that 4:15, 4:20. And I'm just going through that because, as you know, from the work we did and the conversations we had with TAS and others, that the time on a bus is a function in part of the size of the town, 125 miles of roads or so, but also the number of buses that we have to drive those roads. So as we think about scenarios, and we think about number of buses, things like that. So a couple of notes on the methodology that Hanover used, and Jill and I spoke with them along the way and sort of processed all this together. The questions responded by respondent type. We wanted it to be an experience that was specific to the person who was responding. So the community member survey looked fundamentally different almost all the way through once they got into the questions than any of the others. The student survey looked different. The parents did, the staff did. But the question stems were generally the same, but the question was adapted for the person who was answering. They also did data cleaning, as you have to do, and as we worked through the survey, we told people multiple times that they really should. The only parent responses received via the direct email link could be counted. Because we were trying to make sure that the data that we had was as clean as possible, and people were very good about that. Hanover did go back and through, and they had to clean out, you see, the 259 parent responses that were dropped. They also looked to see that we sent them the number of children that each family had in each household. And so if more children were flagged than people actually had in their house, then that was also a red flag for them in the data cleaning. The sample sizes will vary across questions, and some of the percentages are not going to total 100. You'll see that because I know one of the things that all of you do is start adding things up. So they're not, and it's rounding. As we go through and do this, they're close though. So you'll see. Let's see. So we're going to begin actually at the end of the survey, which is the open-ended responses. In the first survey, we didn't have open-ended responses. We were really looking to try to narrow our focus with that. But here, we thought that it'd be a good idea to hear some of the feedback. And I said I've had the weekend to start reading, but it's going to take a lot longer. People have strong feelings about this. What Hanover did, as they were putting it together, they took a methodological approach of segmenting out each of the respondents, so by stakeholder group, and then they segmented again by grade level, and then they randomized them and selected a random sample. So they randomly sampled 100 parents, 90 students. Actually, I just got an email from them saying 100 staff members, and because they did 33 at elementary, 33 at the middle, 34 at the high school to get to 100, and then 30 community members. They examined and cleaned it, and then they went through, read them, analyzed them, and coded them to say this is supportive of change, opposed to change, or neutral. And then they went a step further to code them into themes and subdividing those themes to find out what are the main themes for those that support, what are the main themes for those that oppose, what are the main themes for those that really have not made up their mind. And it's a way to work within a large group, a large body of qualitative feedback in order to derive some meaning from that. So we're going to start there just to go through, and you'll see why. So for the community members, their feedback, this is a sample of the 30 community members out of the 115 who replied. In that sample, we had 40% who were supportive of the change, 10% who were neutral, and 53 who opposed the change. Again, I get it, it's 103%, but they're rounding these things off. Going to the right, you see what was the most common theme. Why are people supportive? Why are people not supportive? And you see that right there. Going to our students, so this is grades 7 and 8 at the middle school. You have the 56% who are supportive of the change, and the 40% who were not supportive of the change. And then the primary reasons for that, again, half of them who were supportive of the change spoke to the sleep and the scientific research on sleep. You're going to see that theme pretty much with every group as you go through. Interestingly, that the middle school also mentioned activities and sports as a reason to consider the change. We can dig into that a little bit deeper. Yes?
I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit confused because I was looking at these are based on the open-ended responses?
Yes.
So, but that's, those percentages are only on the open-ended responses?
Yes.
So we
okay.
don't know how many, in the packet of information, that was one of my questions for later. So now that we're using it as a main talking point, I wanted to understand what percentage of the respondents actually did the open-ended response?
So what they did, what Hanover did,
Yep.
was go through all of they grouped them all.
Yep.
And then anyone who didn't respond to the open-ended,
Right.
they moved that aside,
Right.
moved it out of the pile, had a pile of those who did respond, and then took a representative sample from the pile of those that did respond. So though, if they didn't respond to the open-ended, then
They're out.
they're out, right? They were not considered for this analysis. They were in all the other analysis that we're going to get to in a moment.
Okay,
But
I'm just
for
saying
this,
56%, we have no idea. I think it's important to this data that we
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what percent of people answered the
Well,
open-ended
here's what you
question.
know is, but it's a representative sample of those who answered the open-ended questions,
Yeah.
right? So I'll walk you through it. So for instance, here's the middle school, and there's,
Skewing.
if there were 700 middle schoolers who responded, okay, and if there were 500 who answered the open-ended question, okay, then of those 500, does that say 45? 45 were randomly selected, coded, analyzed, and bring us to these percentages.
Right. So you're.
So
Right.
the number who responded is put aside.
Right.
Now, that is,
I guess the way I would look at it, though, is if you have a very small, I don't know, because that was one of my questions. If saying 500 out of 700, my gut is you had a very small percentage answering open-ended questions. But I don't know that, because I don't have that information in the data that I was given. And so if you have a small percentage, and then you take a sample of a small percentage, and then you assign that to an overall group, if it's a small number actually participating, and you are assigning these percentage to an overall group, I know I'm clear that that's what this is. It's
this is a random sample of those that responded to the open-ended questions.
Correct. I guess.
Why don't we keep going
we
through
can
it?
keep going. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's
All right.
important.
So I think that statistically, the question would be, are those who answer the open-ended questions more motivated to respond on one side of the issue or other? They may have stronger feelings. And that's why, so this is sort of to lay that out, and then we'll get into the more qualitative responses to see if that holds true. Okay, that's all right. I haven't done statistics in a while, but I remember. Okay. But you're right in that, also, I'm glad they stopped me for a minute, because I've been staring at this for a while, and I really should have explained what the other percentages mean as well. So when we say most common theme within the group, it means of the 56% who supported the change, 51% of them gave student sleep and scientific research on sleep as the reason why. And that was the most common theme in the group. 44% of the 56% gave activities and sports as the reason why. Is that clear? Okay. So let me go to the high school students. Of the 45 high school students that were selected, 29% supported the change, and 64% didn't. And again, the student research and scientific research on sleep was the top reason. But interestingly, it was also a reason given by those who did not support the change. The staff. Again, we segmented the staff by the level. The percentage that support, you see, at the elementary school, and the percentage who did not. And again, the same reason for those that support at the top, and the reasons below. The staff at the middle school. And the staff of the high school. This is a combination of certified and non-certified, and they were segmented that way.
So just to, because it doesn't make sense to me that people who are opposing change, citing student sleep, scientific research on sleep, are they basically saying that they think that there are other things that are causing the lack of sleep?
I think that yes, I do think that's what they're saying.
So they're
Yep.
probably saying screen time.
That they're saying there are, screen time, overscheduling, other demands on students' time.
Okay,
That's causing it. I do believe that's what they're saying.
okay.
And we do have the actual responses that we can dive into a little bit to figure out, but it's just going to take some time. Yep. Our parents at the elementary school, so it's 67% support and 37% not. Our parents at the middle school, and our parents at the high school. So to pull it together, again, this is the open-ended response analysis. It's on page 25 in the packet. For our parents, this is pulling together elementary, middle, and high school parents. 54-42 with a margin of error. I think you're pretty close. But you have supporting of the change. The staff, the students, and the community. Okay? And remembering again that 60% of households, about 94% of staff, 75% of the students, and 115 community members. So, I look at these numbers, I look at the open-ended responses, I kind of try to make meaning out of it, and I get about this far. Because this is tough. And there's strong feelings on both sides. So that's why we dive a little bit deeper into the forced choice responses instead of the open-ended, so that we can try to make some meaning out of those. So remembering that we had those 5 schedules that we saw before, and it is on a separate sheet for you if it makes it easier as we talk about it. I tried to include it in the slides. They look a little busy, but it might be easier to have that in front of you. And as you know, the survey itself asked respondents to consider a version of a schedule and then to think about what impact that may have on their experience or their child's experience in school. It also asked them if they support or don't each one of those schedules as we go through. So, a couple of overall findings. Given what we just saw, you probably won't be surprised to hear there's no common schedule preference across the groups. In general, one group's most preferred option tends to be another group's least preferred option. The support for the current schedule barely edges out support for the 3-tier version 3, but we're talking very slim percentages. Opposition to the 3-tiered version 3 schedule is greater than opposition for the current schedule. But again, we're talking a couple percentages here or there. The support for each schedule tends to be tracking with cost, with the one exception being the 3-tiered version 1 schedule. Although it costs significantly less than the 2-tiered, it has slightly less support than the 2-tiered schedule, for whatever reason. It's interesting to note, as we were looking at today, several of these versions have the secondary school starting at the same time. So it's also sort of a head scratcher as to sort of where the support lies as we look at all of this. But go a little bit deeper, look at role and grade level of the respondents. Staff and students prefer the current schedule. Parents are most likely to prefer the 2-tiered and the 3-tiered version 2 schedule. They're least in favor of the current schedule. Students are most likely to support the current schedule and the 3-tiered version 3, and I'll get into those numbers in a minute. The preferences themselves vary greatly by grade level. Again, top option for one grade level of respondent being the least preferred option for another. Nobody thought this would be easy, did you?
Definitely not.
Right. The current schedule ranks high among those in the high school, but towards the bottom for those of the elementary and middle levels. Let's see. That's enough. So we'll get into each one and look at some of the key kind of responses and findings at a high level. Let's see. Students and parents agree the current schedule has a positive impact on participation in activities outside of school. Still, less than half of the respondents believe it is a positive influence on these factors. Students and parents are least likely to believe the current schedule has a positive impact on childcare before or after school. That was an important dimension of consideration in our last survey a year ago, was childcare for families, childcare for staff and others. So, staff are most likely to believe the current schedule positively impacts their ability to provide or find childcare, most likely because this is the system we have and they're already doing it. So making a change would mean they'd have to make a change on that, which makes sense. Traffic was another big one from the first round of survey. So, and I think that's probably a timing thing. A neighboring town had changed schedule about a year before that, and there was a lot of conversation about traffic challenges. But since it was there, we're also going to talk about it a little bit tonight as we go through some of the other data. Less than a fifth of community members believe the current schedule has a positive impact on traffic congestion. And if you've sat in the corner of Farm and South at around 7:55 any morning, I understand why you feel that way. So, current schedule, levels of support. Here's how we're gonna break this down a little bit. The schedule you see there below, these 5 kind of buckets for responses. And you can really put together strongly oppose and oppose. And we can get into all the numbers, but I think the visual representation is pretty good. So you can see that for our students, where the parents are, over 50%, and the community, this is that last question in the survey that folks asked after going through the scenarios and really thinking about each of them. And so, the scenarios were randomized as people took it. So the experiences, again, we were trying to be sure that people were reading and trying to sort of think their way through it a little bit. Again, this is current schedule. Then there's a neither group. Would you support or oppose or neither? We talked a bit about there's some Likert scales that don't have a middle ground. Use 4 options instead of 5, but felt that since we were making everyone answer all of these questions, that it would be right to put that in there, put the neither in there. And then the support and the strong support. Okay. So what probably jumps out at you right away is the difference between the various groups, which is representative of what we saw in the first set. The perceptions of the current schedule, folks were asked to share the perceived impact of the schedule for themselves or their child in a variety of different ways. And so how do you make meaning out of all of this data? We went back to the board's goal itself, the purposes of why we're doing this. And it really, as we know, it's about physical and mental, emotional health. So we wanted to identify the responses in that area. And then when we looked again, we saw that homework was an important thing from the last survey for kids and parents, so we wanted to include that as well. So if you look, the 24% of students and parents feel that the current schedule is beneficial for their emotional health. You can see the 42% for time for homework, and for their physical health, 25%. And that's the schedule that they're living with today. So while students may, or others, they may have said they're not supportive of it, this came before that last question as we were asking them to really think about the impact the schedule has on them. Okay? For our staff, we also asked them a question about the perceived impact of the schedule for them. And again, this is percent positive or very positive. So current schedule, their emotional health at 42% and their physical health at 42%, I believe. It's a little fuzzy for me still. Okay? For community members, this is where the traffic piece comes in. And this was, again, the perceived impact of the schedule on each of those following things, but I just want to highlight the traffic, and you'll understand why when we get towards the end. Okay? So the current schedule, they think that 20% of respondents think that the current schedule is beneficial for the traffic patterns for the community. So that's the current schedule. I know, it's a lot here, I'm sorry. Gonna keep chugging
It's
along until
important.
you tell me
You
not
gotta-
to.
You
All
gotta
right.
go through it all.
All right, so the next is the two-tiered schedule. And again, that's the schedule where instead of breaking our district into thirds, we break them in half. More buses, move folks through. So more than half of our student and parent responses thought it would have a positive impact on students' mental and emotional and physical health, emotional and physical health. Staff were much more skeptical about the positive impact of that. The community members didn't think it would help traffic. So let's take a look. So the breakdown on this one. Again, the blue and the green are the strongly opposed or the oppose. That tan, whatever, is the neither. And then you see those that are supportive. And this is the two-tiered schedule going across. So where does the others land? You see at the top now, at the 60%, 54% is the emotional health and the physical health. And you see that the 38% is the time for homework. For the staff, 28% and 22%. But that's still lower than the current schedule in those ways. For the community, similar results on the impact on traffic, as we mentioned. And that's the two-tiered schedule. The three-tiered version 1, the flip, as we talked about, on page 40. Some big takeaways from that. Students and parents are most likely to believe the schedule would have a positive impact on their physical and emotional health, and least likely to believe it would have a positive impact on traffic, childcare, part-time employment. They're very similar results to those that we saw on the two-tiered schedule. The percentage who believe the schedule will have a positive impact on students' physical and emotional health is not quite as high. You see the rest. And the community with the traffic. So again, this is three-tier version 1, that flip. And we'll talk about each of the scenarios in a little bit. The community and others. Okay? All right. Again, the physical and emotional health, and staff their physical and emotional health as well. And the traffic for the community. The three-tiered version 2 schedule, this groups the 3 elementaries together at once, the high school alone in the middle, and then all of Saks is grouped together in the 3rd tier. More than half the students and parents believe the schedule would have a positive impact on the students' physical health, and 49% on the students' emotional health. There's some concerns expressed about how the schedule would impact childcare before and after school, and the availability of transportation to and from school. Traffic congestion at the end of the day, and participation in activities outside of school. Staff are most optimistic about the impact this schedule would have on their physical and emotional health and their ability to attend appointments, but only a third believe there'd be a positive impact on these factors. So, staff are least confident the schedule would have a positive impact on their ability to coach sports. But on this one, community members are more likely to believe the schedule would have a positive impact on traffic congestion. So, the overall thoughts on this one? Again, those are the strongly oppose or the oppose. I wish I could get the neither out of there, but I just only had a weekend. The support and the strong support. Okay? All of these will be together in the last slide to take a look at. And just what we just said about the breakdown for version 2 and the community members there. Version 3, as you'll see, more than half believe it have a positive impact on the physical health, and nearly half on students' emotional health. Students' part-time employment concerns were not quite as strong as they were with the others. The, okay. Staff are most likely to believe this schedule would have a positive impact on their physical health, their ability to find or provide childcare, and their emotional health compared to the other factors, although still lower than the current schedule. And let's see. So again, support from each of the stakeholder groups. This is the opposed, strongly opposed. Support and strongly support. Okay. And again, that's the physical health, the emotional health, and the time for homework, and the same for the staff. Oh, sorry. But you get it. Okay. So, tons and tons of results and percentages and numbers, and there's just no other way to do this, so I do apologize for standing here and throwing all this at you. But I'm trying to think again, how do we make meaning out of this? What is it? Where do you take it from here? So what we did, I put this together as a way to see kind of where did folks come out? So if we say, why are we doing this? We're doing this, our students' emotional health and well-being, physical health and well-being, and what came out in part from 2018 was time for homework was really important for kids and families. So we wanted to look at that number as well. We did the same with our staff, their emotional health, their physical health. And then for the community, the biggest driver for them from 2018 was the traffic piece. So putting all of this together, a couple of takeaways that I have, and you're certainly welcome to develop your own, but it looks to me that the three-tier version 2 and version 3 are very similar in the responses between physical health and emotional health of our students, and people feeling that it would be beneficial for them. The staff believing that the current schedule is the best, but if you go down a little bit, the next best looks to be that three-tier version 2, although those three tiers are all pretty similar, as you look across at the staff. But at a glance, it looks like that version 2. For the community, same thing. It looks like the three-tier version 2 and three-tier version 3 are pretty similar in the response. If I had to pick one, I would, statistically, you'd say the version 2 would be the preferred scenario. As far as what are we measuring here? Anticipated changes to traffic patterns. Certainly not an area of expertise for me.
Or me.
Yeah, but people were sharing their opinions on that, and that's what surveys do. They collect people's perceptions of these things. But, as I look at this, it sort of takes all of the part of the questionnaire that we ask people to spend the most time on, which was for them to identify how they think these dimensions of the experience would change as a result of changing school start times. So I think it's really worthy of sort of taking this little bit of time to understand it for our discussion in a little bit. I found it interesting that 60% of the parents and students thought the two-tier would be so much more beneficial for homework. I'm not entirely sure why, but again, if you sort of look at that a little bit as an outlier, maybe the 36% is your next highest beyond the current for that homework piece as well. So, okay,
Great.
I'm almost done. I purposely turned, you can have a timer when you do presentations like this. I turned it off. So the last question that folks were asked to respond to in the questionnaire itself was to indicate what degree you support or oppose the adoption of the following schedule for 2021. And once again, you're about to see lots of colors. But the first is in the same color scheme, the strongly opposed to opposed to, this is everybody aggregated, right? So we broke it out by stakeholder group in those other slides. This is everybody all together. So again, you've got 95% of the staff or so of the certified staff, the other 75% of the non-certified, you have 60% of households, and the 75% of grades 7 through 12. So strongly opposed to oppose. You throw neutral in there, you just about balance everything off. And then if you go to your support and strongly support, the challenge is there's not a clear decision that comes from the survey itself. I think the broad participation from each of the stakeholder groups is very meaningful in this, that there are strong feelings in different ways across. I think that in the absence of a very clear result that points the board in a direction, I'd ask you to think about the work that we've been doing over the last year or so in thinking about the scenarios that were presented back from TAS when we had the follow-up conversations. Those of you that were with us for the focus group conversation, the other things that we've been doing with the follow-up report from TAS, the survey from last year, the feedback from our kids, like there's quite a bit that we've been sort of talking about and thinking about. Oh, is my time up? Oh, darn. But there's quite a bit that we've been thinking about and talking about, and I think that certainly with results like this, we bring to bear that other experience and the other things that we've been thinking about, that I know you've been thinking about, and certainly for us as administrative team, we've been talking about. And we've been sharing with the board, at least once a month, those updates along the way. So I have my thoughts, but I'm going to hold off. And I'm glad to do my very best to answer any questions, and I know there's a ton of information here. This presentation will be up on our website momentarily. People are welcome to go through it. The challenge is with such a large pool of data to try to isolate it down to a couple of things that are most meaningful for the board, for the district, and for the community as we think about kind of next steps. I will again say that tonight is a next step in the process. The process as we've been following it throughout the course of the year, I think has worked quite well in that we've been building that knowledge and background. We've been reading the articles, sharing the feedback, sharing information from other districts and things. We've been talking about what we've learned along the way. So by approaching this as learners, I think that we, the board and the district is in the best place to take the next step, whatever that's going to be.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lutzy. I've got just a few comments to start, and then we'll open up for discussion, if that works. And I wrote a little bit here, so I'll kind of walk through it. So we may not obviously have a clear answer from the presentation, although I do think it's very helpful, and going through some of the detail was particularly helpful. We as the Board of Ed obviously have to provide guidance where the path may not necessarily be clear. I'd like to just make clear though tonight what we're doing and what we aren't doing. We're providing guidance to the administration as it relates to the next steps in this process and evaluating one particular start time option or not. My hope is that we can tonight provide guidance to the administration on one particular option. I'll give you my thoughts as to what I think makes the most sense. If we make that determination tonight as to what that option should be to evaluate, the ultimate decision would be made in the fall and winter. This coming fall and winter as we consider the building blocks of the 2020-2021 school year budget. And ultimately approval of that budget. I'd like everybody to know also that while this initially started as something that a group brought forward, as Dr. Lutzy mentioned, this is part of a broader effort around health and wellness, and frankly, just a broader effort that the New Canaan Public Schools endeavors to do every day, which is to improve the quality of our New Canaan Public Schools and the education and health of our kids. The Health and Wellness Initiative in particular has included, as Dr. Lutzy said, social and emotional learning, homework-free, long weekends and vacation, decompression efforts around final exam times, school schedule studies, obviously start time options, and a range of other things. While start times are an important issue, they're an issue that we have to examine in the context of everything else that's done within the school system and what's best for all of our students, not one particular group of kids, one particular school, or one particular issue. It's a complex system that we're managing. And the lives of our kids are complex too. You can tell from some of these questions and answers that, you know, they're balancing homework, they're balancing sports, they're balancing, you know, performing arts, et cetera. And we have to help them do that in an effective way. Health and wellness is incredibly important. You know, we want our kids to be healthy. Without their health, it's difficult for them to grow and succeed. So when I look at these results, the health and wellness scores are, you know, really, really important to me. So the question is, and I've definitely heard this from some people, we're doing so well in New Canaan, why do we need to make a change, right? Our schools are, you know, the best in the state, arguably among the best in the country. The reason for that, I think, is pretty obvious, which is if we, you know, feel that way and we do nothing, we'll not, you know, remain first in the state and among the best in the country. We have to constantly improve. We have to innovate. We have to change to meet the needs of our kids, expectations of the community, which are high, and future expectations that our kids will face when they become adults. I don't know whether we're going to make a change this winter, but I have some initial thoughts. So, you know, number one, as Dr. Flynn mentioned tonight, he and other physicians recommend that teenagers not start school before 8:30 a.m. We know that when start times in other communities have been pushed back, depending upon the magnitude, total sleep times have increased. We know that increased sleep positively impacts health and wellness for children and adults. We have evidence from our elementary school teachers, and the research around elementary school start times doesn't really exist, but we have some evidence from our elementary school teachers that many of their students have trouble staying focused later in the afternoon. My guess is that probably also impacts some of our younger SAC students as well. Based on the survey, as we saw tonight, only 24% of the parents and students believe that the current schedule has a positive impact on the kids' mental and emotional health. That compares to levels that are closer to 45 to 50%, depending upon the scenario, with alternative start times. The most positive survey responses related to the current schedule were mostly related to extracurricular activities, including athletics, VPA, employment, and homework. So we need to think about whether there's a better way, one that has a positive impact on health and wellness, that meets the expectations that the community and our stakeholders have. I think that based on the research that's been done, based on the feedback that we have, I think it's worth figuring out whether there's a viable option to have our teenagers go to school later, and the likely output from that, although I think also beneficial for our younger students, is for them to go to school earlier. So the question is, which scenario makes the most sense to study further? Although I'd love to move to a two-tier system, you know, the results in the survey were somewhat mixed on that. You know, my sense from having gone through a very difficult budget battle over the past winter, and it was a bit of a battle, you know, despite us coming in almost $1 million below Board of Finance guidance, you know, we had a vigorous debate with the Board of Finance and with the Town Council, and, you know, barely got through. Thank you, Tom, for your help. I wish that, you know, it were not so difficult, but the reality is that it was difficult, and I think if we were to ask for $1.2+ million, you know, this coming budget season for the following fiscal year, I don't think it would pass. So I don't want to suggest that we go down a path that I just think is unrealistic in light of, you know, the budget pressures that we're under. I also think there's another way to skin the cat and get to the right solution for our kids in light of all the constraints, whether it's financial or otherwise. We know that in order to attend athletic events without missing class, high school should not end after 3 p.m. Luckily, all these scenarios, are actually do that. But just so people know, that's a major constraint. We have roughly 70%, a little bit more than 70% of our New Canaan High School students participating in athletics. So that's just a really important constraint that we're living under. We know that professional learning is somewhat hampered at the elementary school level by having those schools on 2 different schedules. Some of this may be impacting SACS as well, with SACS having 2 different start and end times. My other sense is, we don't know the answer to this yet, but my sense is that after-school activities and even some before-school activities are inefficient as a result of having different start times for the elementary schools, kids in the same grade. So, for example, after-school soccer can't start until after East and West get out of school. Maybe if those schools were all on the same schedule, it would be a more efficient, after-school timeline. The offset to that is the high school teams oftentimes need fields and things like that. So that may not necessarily prove out, but it's possible. For those reasons, I would eliminate the 3-tier option number 1 because it doesn't align the elementary schools or SACS. And then lastly, as it relates to option 3, we know that many middle schoolers participate in after-school activities, and childcare is needed for many of them before and after school. For the 5th and possibly 6th graders, it's possible that some of the same issues with student focus later in the day could also apply. For these reasons, I think option 3, the 3-tier option 3, doesn't make sense with SACS starting at 9:30, which is very late, and getting out at 4. Going back to the original focus group, having kids get home at 4:45 or thereabouts, I think is just too late. The other consideration on that scenario is New Canaan High School will only begin about a half an hour later at 8 a.m. So if we're going to make a change, I feel like we should try to make a more meaningful change to the New Canaan High School start time. So we're left with, at least I'm left with, in my view, the 3-tier option 2. So we'd have the elementary school start first, all at the same time, then New Canaan High School, and then SACS. I think based on the results that we've seen, particularly the second to last page, if you look at the responses on 3-tier version 2 or option 2, emotional health and physical health are among the highest of all the scenarios. Physical health is 1 percentage point lower than the highest, which is version 3, but it's essentially, I'd say statistically the same at 54%. Emotional health at 49% is the highest. Homework is 6 percentage points lower than the current system. So my guess is, we can figure that out. We can figure out a way to make up that 6 percentage point difference, whether it's, managing the school day schedule, whether it's managing the amount of homework or the type of homework or the cadence between courses. Maybe there are ways to modify that percentage. The other thing I'd say is no one really knows what, if they're going to school starting at 8:20 versus 7:30, the high school kids don't know and the parents don't know. We don't know what the impact ultimately will be on homework, all else being equal. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to spend time studying and maybe coming up with a solution for if we do choose to make a change over the next number of months. So, what are we doing over the next few months, and how might that help us ultimately determine whether or not we want to make a change? Number one, provide greater clarity on the very specific school start and end times in the scenario that we hopefully choose, as well as specific bus routing and pickup times. So why does that matter? For some people, including myself, who commute on the train, if you're 5 minutes later or earlier, it could really impact your ability to make a train, to get on the road, to meet someone to pick you up, whatever it might be, to get to work or otherwise. So I think as for each individual family, understanding exactly what the impact is for that family, whether it's childcare, work, otherwise, I think will be helpful to understand, the impacts to their families. And so I think providing, that detail within the scenario will be helpful. Second, discussing with organizations such as the Y, Nature Center, Recreation Department, churches, performing arts organizations, athletic associations, discussing impacts to their programming will be really helpful to understand what they can't do, can do, modifications to their programs to help families to the extent that, things might be needed. Again, in this alternative scenario, where we are today, it's hard to have those conversations because, we have 4 different alternatives plus the current one versus, if we were to provide guidance tonight, people could talk about the way things are today versus what they might be under this second option. And then lastly, which might be the most important, is to address the issue that some of the respondents raised in the survey, which is really around extracurricular activities. So how do I, as a high school student or 7th or 8th grader, manage my life if the schedule were to change? And I think part of that is understanding which schedule it is, right? And really digging in and saying, okay, I go to school, 45 minutes later or earlier, whatever it might be, and for parents to understand that as well. But part of that also is sort of on us as a district to say, how can we optimize it in an alternative scenario? And I think that's some of the really difficult but important work that needs to be done over the next few months. If all of this is done, I think we'll be able to be in a position in the fall and winter to be able to make a very well-educated decision. I think we'll have input from lots of different stakeholders on a very specific alternative, and we'll make a call one way or another. And I think we'll do it with the best interests of our families and kids in mind. And really try to optimize the system, which is what, again, we're supposed to do, and I think we are doing, day to day in the New Canaan Public Schools. So why don't I stop there and open it up? Sherry?
So first, I think that was an excellent recap, a bit long, but it was good.
Sorry about that. I didn't expect to hear that from you, Sherry.
No, it was actually a great recap, and I actually wanted to start by thanking Dr. Lutzy for the extensive presentation and really all the parents here tonight and who have been so involved and stayed informed throughout this process. I mean, I know we all want to be in our backyards for a summer barbecue tonight, but we're all here because we're invested in this issue. We care about our kids. I actually do want to lend my support for your conclusion, which is I also support looking at the 3-tiered version 2 for further support. And just a couple of things I want to reiterate that are important to me is, as a board, we've all agreed that we would prioritize student health and wellness, and I think that this option best does that. Also, I think, Dr. Lutzy, to your point, the stakeholder survey did highlight the complexity of the issue, but it's not unexpected because stakeholders are different, they have different perspectives, different priorities, and this stakeholder survey is, in fact, just one input into our process. And as you mentioned, it's been almost a 2-year-long process, which I know has frustrated some, but also now I hope some have come to appreciate the thoughtful and deliberate approach and the amount of data that we've collected to make the right decision. So again, this stakeholder survey is just one input into that process. And I do think it's now, Brendan, I think your leadership is correct in that we need to move forward and that we need, as a board, to provide guidance on the best option to further research that we can action, because it has been 2 years. So we need to move forward, and we all need to be ready to kind of state the case for what we believe in. I think going back to our board priority of student health and wellness, it's clear that the current schedule is lowest on health and wellness. So I think it's become clear that that's not the best option for our kids. I think the 2-tiered schedule is cost prohibitive. And I think the 3-tiered version 1 and the 3-tiered version 3 do not optimize our focus group guidelines. And so I think we're really left then, in the situation where we should be further exploring the 3-tiered version 2. I think that in addition to what you outlined that we need to further study for this option, I want to better understand the staff opposition to this and really understand kind of, is it an inconvenience that they will get over, or is it actually something that they would make a job decision based upon that? So that for me is my biggest outstanding concern that I would really want to drill down and better understand.
And we would see that as one of the dimensions of our work this summer, to speak with the union representative, other folks that are involved, certified, non-certified, to be able to share that understanding when we get back.
Mm-hmm. And then just my final comment would be that I agree, and we've said this before, that the start and end times is a strategy. It's not a solution. It's part of a much bigger ecosystem. When we make this change, sleeplessness, tired and stressed out teens, that issue is not going to suddenly magically go away. So we just need to keep the dialogue going.
Absolutely.
I think because I was so brief.
Yeah. We're exhausted at the end of my. Anyone else? Maria?
I want to add, I agree with Sherry, and I think it's kind of funny that the lowest health and emotional perception goes with the current schedule, which is the preferred. It actually has the greatest support, but I think that's because a lot of people don't really like change, or they just know what they know, and it's easier to accept what you know versus the unknown. But it seems to me, looking at it from a fiscal point of view, something that would really do what all the research says is good and important for kids, getting them that extra sleep, I think that would be important. My biggest wish for this process would be to have more of a working committee, like we have looked at a representative sample of the comments. I would like to actually see the comments, because I bet they are well thought out, and I think they might shed light on scheduling concerns. There might even be ideas in there for addressing some of these teacher issues, parent issues, traffic issues. And it seems like the community's biggest objection really is the money. So I think we have to put our heads together to figure out how to pay for what's right, which is what we do all the time. So just focus on this particular issue. So a working group that includes parents, board members, something that's really bilateral communication, just getting feedback. I think that would be important. So
I agree with that point. If we're moving forward with a scenario tonight, I think it will be a more focused discussion.
Right.
And having a group of people come together and maybe talk about, at each meeting, talk about one particular issue, bring in, community organizations to the extent relevant, or other parties. I think that would be helpful.
And just the final thing is to look at the actual school day scheduling, which maybe you're thinking of anyhow. Maybe there's a way to readjust classes that will allow teachers to come in when they need to, just basically getting input from everyone. And I support 3-tier version 2, going in that direction.
Others? Penny?
So I can be even briefer because a lot of my points have been made. I also, to cut to the chase, support 3-tier version 2, but I really want a lot of research to understand what we can do, because there is a lot of staff resistance to this. This does take an entire school, SACs, and change it to getting out at 3:35. I want to understand what that might do. I know that, and how the district, how we might, because we'll have over a year to implement this, if this is the direction we go, how we can work with that and what we could possibly do in terms of at the high school having after-school activities, however we handle those that make the entire high school experience so rich. And then also on that, one of the things I really wanted to delve into is what are the, if we do that option, we have, for K through fourth graders getting on the bus, I think, starting at about 7:15 in the morning. But I don't know.
It would be earlier than that.
It might be
But
early.
we don't, that's,
6:40.
so just to drill into that for a moment, that's one of the advantages of doing what we're doing tonight. So that, we'll be able to answer that question very precisely when we return, because what we'll be able to do is build the routing around that, knowing where the students live. So while it might change, depending upon when people move in, we can at least be able to say, given the variables we have now in this scenario, the earliest child would be picked up at this time. The longest bus ride would be approximately this long. So we can answer those questions, which is part of the value of narrowing. We couldn't do that for 4 different scenarios.
Right,
We just
right.
don't have the ability, the manpower to do it. Although, Roy is amazing, but he's also still running our transportation system concurrently.
Right, and I think-
So we'll be able to answer those questions and put those into, under consideration when we return.
And then actually, because the picture that was presented, was clearly worth 1,000 words, but I'd be curious if, under the new scenario, how the pickup times will jive with, sunrise.
I agree.
And what percentage of the days of the year would we be, would we think it was okay, or would we think it might be a little bit dark? And, if there are some days when it's dark, maybe then, in order, if we all decide we like this scenario, maybe we have an education campaign, or maybe we do something different. Maybe we just, I don't know, maybe there's things that we can do as a district to address those concerns. That would be one of the things I would be interested in knowing.
Agreed, because by putting the elementaries in the first tier, again, we've got a number of walkers at South, so some conversation about that and the timing and what it looks like, and all of that would be in order. Yeah.
But in any event, I end up with wanting to know more about the 3-tiered version too.
Okay. Thanks.
Other comments?
So I'm definitely disappointed that the survey wasn't more definitive, for sure, because, you guys have been awesome championing this cause, and, but I've also had a lot of people come to me on the other side expressing concern about their elementary school kids going early, or, just even on a personal note, again, kids don't like change. But most of my kids and kids that I talk to, they really enjoy that time they get in the afternoon. So, it's so hard, and the numbers are so close. Of all of these versions, I definitely like the 3-tiered version too, for sure. I would like to know more about, we're doing so many things on social emotional, the curriculum in the schools. I know we just had a presentation. They're talking about bringing that to the high school. Would love to know, some of the things that we can do to help this that are not going to, cost more money, like the block scheduling. I don't really know anything about that. I know, or the add-on of the first period. Did you speak about something about the high school and being able to get maybe an opt-in free period, first period? I don't know if we ever.
So that's when we talk about technical and adaptive solutions. Right? Shifting a master schedule at a high school is significant sort of change in practices and beliefs and approaches and those things. It's not something we just do. But we do have a group that's been researching that and looking into it, and they are committed to figuring out the best way to deliver the high school program in the time they have. And as they continue to do that work, we'll continue to sort of bring that information and feedback, back.
Right.
There's no one right schedule, just like there's not necessarily one right start time, one right this, one right that. It's about sort of doing what works best for the district and what have you. So, but that work is ongoing. There have been 2 different teams of teachers that spent a full day towards the end of the year at schools that run different types of schedules. I have experience with it. Principal Egan has experience with different schedules. So, we're bringing all of that to bear, but it's, the work is kind of, it begins with the teachers.
Right.
You know, as they continue to do it. But, you know, we do have the reporting out, Dr. Bliss comes out each year to share with us feedback around the work that's going on in the district. And each time she comes, she highlights a different building and the work that they're doing and shares, you know, information and feedback. You know, the board is very committed to social emotional health of all of the students. And
Right.
I mean, the fact we're having this discussion at all, I think, is reflective of that. And, you know, it will continue to discuss and consider and, you know, champion all of these causes.
Yes, of course. And then, you know, the only other thing that I see in the three-tiered version 2 is, you know, the SACs, the concerns with like the 5th and 6th graders being with the 7th and 8th graders and the busing. And so I would love, you know, I don't know how we look into that more of parent feedback, just, you know.
Yep, I mean, that's a part of going to that scenario.
Right.
Somebody did ask me, well, could we have them on different buses? And you really can't.
No.
It's because it's one tier, so they have to be, you know, on those same buses. But there are districts that do, and we certainly can reach out to them and talk to them. Other districts that have a 5 through 8 middle school and get feedback from them. You know, open the doors, as you know, Maria and others said, to invite more dialogue now that, you know, you narrow down the options, you can have a focused conversation dealing with and sort of revolving around the knowns instead of the perceived, you know, sort of possibles.
Right.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so like, when would we, I mean, if we're moving forward and we're doing more research, I'm assuming that Roy is going to be working on this over the summer to give us perspective, like bus times and then we're going to be getting, like, when will we be talking about this again? In the fall, like September?
In the fall.
In the fall.
Roy's here. I don't want to overcommit him.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, that would, again, like, just, again, through this whole process, like a timeline of, like, when is our next,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that,
Yeah,
but,
Brendan laid out a
just so
timeline
we
when he was
can-
talking a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a broad timeline, but it'd be good, you know, it's probably not our next meeting, but maybe the meeting after that, we have, you know, a timeline laid out, similar to what we did, you
Right.
know, in December, January.
Right.
We had the timeline through today.
because we're going to have to know, like, in order, I mean, budget season's already, like, starting, probably.
In some ways, yeah.
So, yeah, that would just be good to know, just so that we're prepared and
Yeah.
we have all the
Definitely.
information we need to make that decision. So,
Yeah.
but thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, I guess I have a couple thoughts. The survey is about as clear as mud. You know, I look at, you know, because I'm kind of a data geek or whatever, I went and with every option, laid it right next to every other option, and, you know, while the health and wellness on the 3-tier version 2 gets us to, like, the physical health is 54% versus 49%, we're sort of at around 50%, so half like it, half don't. And whatever we do, based on the results of this survey, I'm guessing half the people in this community are going to be happy and half the people in this community are going to be very unhappy. So we're sort of a little bit in a lose-lose as a board. I think, you know, I'm not anywhere yet. I haven't made a decision. I think there's a lot of data that we still need to collect. You know, that I agree that the consolidating all the elementary schools on one schedule is a great idea if we can do it cost effectively. I am not necessarily as convinced that having the whole middle school on one schedule is a great idea. You know, having been in this community for over 20 years, you know, the one way we sell SACs as being the largest school in the state for a middle school is that we separate out the 5th and 6th transportation and the 7th and 8th transportation so that they are never on the same bus together. And that's how a lot of parents have gotten comfortable with SACs being the largest middle school in the state. So I would like to understand, and I would think, I think it's going to be critical. I thought we had too many options in the survey to begin with. I think I articulated that a few months ago. I think we need to resurvey if we are going to put forward one option to review. I think we need to do a head-to-head with the current schedule, and if we decide to go with the 3-tier, and I'd also like to have that information disaggregated. I don't think it's, I think parents and students, and I actually think it should be disaggregated by grade. I don't think, we've talked about there's different developmental things that happen or big changes in certain grades that kids are used to by the time they get into high school or something. So, so that's it. And then, yeah, because I think, you know, the thing that I always look to, and I've said this before, is that Wilton was very fortunate to be able to make this change 10 years ago. You know, it didn't cost them any money, and so they were able to do it. But if you know, I've been at conferences where, you know, we've talked to the superintendent, and their social emotional outcomes are not any better than ours. And so, you know, to me, I need to understand, for $350,000 to $450,000 a year that will escalate from here till eternity, what are we really getting out of that? Versus, you know, the other social emotional things that we're looking at that will be lower cost options that could have dramatic impacts on our students' health and wellness. So I just want to understand it, because I do need to look at the economic impacts, because it's a huge overhang right now. It's a very huge overhang on this district, and we need to be thinking about the best ways to get those social emotional outcomes that are positive for our kids, but in a cost-effective manner. And then I think that's it. Oh, and I actually would like to make a comment. I've gotten a lot of comments from parents who are afraid to speak at these meetings or comment because they feel that a group in this community is silencing them or making them feel like if they try to say something, I've had the word bully used. So I would like to encourage, this is a very difficult issue for all of us to tackle. And not everybody believes the same thing as everyone else, but we are one community, and we need to come together with whatever decision is made and be respectful of everyone's opinions. So, that's it.
Thanks.
I had something to add too.
Maria?
I just want to go back a little bit. I agree, not everyone believes the same way, and to kind of tag on to what Jen said about the social emotional learning stuff that's coming into the high school. I think high school's kind of unique in that the time during the day is really valuable and important, and I think if the teachers are looking at that, I think we need to involve some parents and board members, because maybe there's things that kind of like, are we layering too much on the high school students that maybe we could pull back on, that will not only save money, but they'll have the same effect, they'll get more sleep. I just feel like we really have to analyze the high school, and, you know, like Deanna said, break it down by grade level and kind of analyze the issues by grade level and take into account, I know a lot of parents don't like the fifth graders on the idea of fifth graders on a bus with eighth graders. But, so I think as much input as you can get from all constituents, I think that would be really helpful before, you know, like soon. Thanks.
Just a couple of comments on you know, Deanna's points. You know, while I tend to agree that if we make a decision ultimately to make a change, there are going to be a lot of people who don't like that change. But at the same time, I'd like to think if we make a decision to make a change, that we're doing it with the best interest of the kids in mind. And ultimately, it's going to be because we think there'll be a win for the kids. And it may not necessarily be popular, but based on what we've seen, and I think we saw it in the survey results, we've seen it in other districts that have made a change, is that there's a very significant difference between you know, the survey respondents' perception of health and wellness under the current schedule versus any of the other options, like double you know, the positive impact from a health and wellness standpoint. And then in other districts, we have seen that when school start times get pushed back, kids get more sleep. And we know, I said this earlier, but we know that when kids get more sleep, that it has a positive impact on their health. Can we necessarily make, you know, in a particular community that has a relatively small number of people, can we make the leap from a school start time change means that, you know, there are fewer instances of, you know, individual issues as it relates to kids, whether it's, you know, tardiness or, you know, serious emotional issues. I think that's hard because we're dealing with complex systems and relatively small numbers. But we do know that if start times are pushed back for teenagers, they get more sleep, and we know that more sleep has a positive impact on health. So I'd like to think that if we do make a change, we're doing it, and we're ultimately as a community going to win as a result, because we're doing it for the right reasons. From a cost standpoint, I made a comment about the two-tier system just being too costly and frankly unrealistic. If it were realistic and I felt like we could get it through and everybody, collectively on the board felt like it was the best option ultimately, then I think we should support it. But I don't want to support something that I think is, unlikely to pass. I think $300,000 to $500,000, as an addition to our budget. Again, we don't know exactly what the number is, but somewhere in that ballpark is something that is manageable, particularly in light of, what the positive impacts from a health and wellness standpoint could be. So that's kind of how I think about it. Katrina.
So I agree with most everything that's been said. It is disappointing we don't have a clear option, but I think in light of everything we know and we've heard and understand about our district, version 2 makes the most sense in terms of exploring that. I think it has limitations like all of the options, but with the buses and the budget constraints is something that we have to consider. So I too am supportive with moving forward in terms of researching it. A couple of things to consider. I think a lot of, it's a 50-50, so there are going to be a lot of opinions, and I think perhaps, Maria, I think Diana said this, but I think formalizing a format for feedback from our community, parents, staff, everyone, may help us to use the information that we get in terms of feedback to help us make this decision ultimately, and whether it's an on-demand survey or just formalizing a method for providing feedback versus just encouraging emails and a lot of the same things that we get. So that would be one point. Another would be just thinking about that 7:30 to 8:20 hour in this version is what happens to that. How much flexibility is there? Is the school open? Because if we were to move forward, I think the goal is for kids to get more sleep. So we just, I think that should be one of the guiding principles as well. So I think, and then the final thing was just understanding, and I know, Brendan, you mentioned this, but the reality of how active our kids are and the field availability and what happens to, our kids staying up later, are they out later? What happens to all of that? And those are things that are on my mind as we think about this going forward. So.
Yeah, I think just on that point to say a little bit more, I think talking to, as part of the next steps, talking to all of the, after-school program providers, whether it's sports or, or other programs, about what we're trying to do or what we may try to do and why, so that, they sort of appreciate it and, they buy into it if we are to make a change, and they have, some sort of sense as to, the various considerations. And we get a sense from them as to what their constraints are, right? Which may upend a lot of different schedules. So I think that's really important. Just one other point, to agree with Deanna, I absolutely agree with just making sure as a community we, can have real dialogue. There are people on, all sides of this issue, and everybody obviously has to have respect for one another. So we ask that everybody practices that. Julie.
So everyone's pretty much said what I would say. I too support, for the reasons that have been listed, the option 2. I think as the newest board member, I haven't been here from the get-go of all this, but I think one thing that's really struck me has been the letters that we've received on both sides, and I think at the bottom line of all this is that we all want our kids to be to be healthy. We want our kids to be making good choices. And I think, even for the folks who want to keep it the way it is, various reasons, but I think, what's come through is that they feel that their kids are just fine as they are now. And so I understand and appreciate that. And I do think, again, as you said, Deanna and Brendan, it's important that we respect those opinions. And also, I do think it's important that we get more to the bottom of the teachers, because that's, there's such, obviously, they're a huge part of what makes our kids successful, and we don't want to be alienating a large part of this. But in the end, yes, I support the second option.
Okay. Deanna?
I just, as you're doing your research over the summer, I think one of the critical things people have asked about and I would like to get an answer to is there's a lot of concern as to if things get moved, what happens to that. Right now there's a 45-minute period at the end of the school day between when the kids get out and when any sports practices start. Or maybe it's 55 minutes actually. So anyway, there's big concern that that might go away, and I will say loudly now, I would never be okay with making a change and then moving help before school. That I could never get my arms around that. I don't think it's fair. I think it's spending a lot of money to, we have very kids that want to do their best, and if that's the only place they can get homework help and tutoring and talk to their teachers, I will say that right now. I would want that to be able to have those kids having that ability to work with teachers. So if you could kind of get some information about that.
Certainly be a part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, what we can do is even try to do sort of a day in the life of a student who's a student athlete, a student who's in visual performing arts, a student. I mean, we can do some different
that's a great
things.
idea.
That's why I don't want to commit to saying August or September. I want to make sure that when we share this with the board, it's as comprehensive as possible and can answer a lot of those questions.
Add another thing, maybe also is the SACS after-school programs probably wouldn't be after school anymore, right?
Right,
So they would
in
be
this scenario, or in this version with a 3:35 dismissal, you would probably look at moving those before.
So they'd be at like 8:20.
I don't want to get
I'm just saying,
ahead of the actual study, but, I mean, I think it's fair to say that,
I think
right,
all-
that's,
yeah, examining.
right now, East and West their faculty meetings and things like that are before school. They do the early bird drop-off for kids and some other things like that. So I would anticipate that those things, that what happens after school now would shift to before school for the middle school students. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think we need to come up with a kid wakes up at this time, what does the full day look like? And does it work? Does it not? And it's going to be different for every kid, but you got to kind of figure that out.
I think you should also add in those scenarios, almost take like a football player, because, I know some sports don't go as late, but like some sports, when they have a game during the week, they go very late. So what would happen if you shifted all of that to later? So I think it's important.
It's actually going to be fun to go deep. We've been so broad for so long. It's going to be, I do like this stuff. It's going to be fun to go deep and to really understand all dimensions of a scenario. So,
Maria?
I mean, I know this is just a solution, just to throw it out there, but maybe there's a end of the day flex period. I mean, I know my daughter did rowing, so we had to get out of, New Canaan and get on the road right after school ended. So just,
you're a few
maybe
steps down the
that's-
road there.
I know, I'm down the road, but yeah. it's
Yeah,
just a
those are
thought.
the discussions we have.
We're into our working session.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you.
And just, while we transition, I just want to commend the board. I mean, you could have looked at the results of the survey and sort of been frozen in place given the inconclusive nature of the results. And so I want to just commend you for continuing forward and continuing down the process that we laid out. So thank you. It's helpful for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, next up is statement of accounts with Dr. Keating.
Bye.
Feel free to get up
You're
and leave.
Oh, you can stay. Oh, you can certainly stay.
Thank you first.
All right, so you have before you the May 31st.
committed to anything.
No,
I think people need to be clear, we haven't committed to anything. 'Cause,
Continuing the process.
Yeah.
We're continuing the process.
I don't think, sorry, my mic wasn't on. I don't think anybody, I hope everybody understands, we're not committing to anything right now. It's continuing the process, so.
Which is important.
There's a time, if you'd like to stay, there's a time at the end for comments.
We'll be quick.
Very quick. So before you, you have the May 31st Statement of Accounts. We're almost there. We're closing at the end of this week. So that's all very exciting for us in the business office. To date, through the end of May, we have spent 83.1% of our budget, or $74.6 million. We have $13.6 million encumbered, or 15%, and that's primarily all of our salaries that are paid out in the balloon within the last paycheck, which will be this Friday. And we do have discretionary accounts that are spent throughout the month, which is $1.5 million. Just to let you know, we still stand about a little bit over $600,000 over budget in the tuition out of district account for special ed students. And we have notified the town, as I've mentioned before, in terms of the potential access for excess cost. We've reported that to the audit committee as well. And as we close the accounts, that number will come down because we'll have funds in other accounts throughout the 700 accounts that we have in the budget to reduce that, but it won't cover the full amount. And so we will be informing the town as we close the books exactly how much we'll need. That's about it.
Great. Any questions? All right, thanks, Dr. Keating. Okay, next up are the action items. We're not approving the PPA tonight?
No, so we, as you know, we have to post our agenda in advance on Friday morning in order to have the 24-hour posting. So we were still working with Davis and Shipman as we went into Friday and through. So to be safe, we put this on here to be sure that we were prepared if the PPA was ready. Time is important here. It is urgent because, as you know, we're gearing up and we're beginning our work over there. So what I would ask the board is if we're able to pull together the final draft of the PPA sometime in the next couple of days, and I anticipate we can. What I'd like to do is request the board hold a special meeting just for that purpose. We can have it right at Locust Avenue. If we get a quorum together, and I would get you a copy of the PPA that 24 hours in advance, because all special meetings are posted 24 hours in advance. So we would have that final draft, or final for you to take a look at, come together, and we can try to, we can share with you what's changed, and go ahead and have that vote. And then ultimately, that would enable me to execute the agreement, and then we'll have First Selectman do the same. And, you know, we're being probably more cautious than we need to be, but it's, as we've said, it's a 20-year agreement. And so we just want to make sure that we are very careful taking every step along the way. And I know the board feels the same way. So if that's
sounds good,
as long as 5 folks are available, we can pull that off.
No, I just, in addition to the updated contract, if, I think I asked at the last board meeting if we could get those financials associated with with Davis's thing, because we didn't get that. And then I also want to say, you are not being overly careful. This is a 20-year deal, and it is very important that we're all very comfortable with it.
Yes.
So you're not being overly cautious.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And we can turn the financials around pretty quickly, I think. Yeah, that would be great. Good. Thank you.
All right. So next up is the Model UN conferences.
Can I ask one question? Since when we have that meeting, we might not have the full board. If any board members have a major objection to the power purchase agreement, just maybe let Brian know or let us know somehow so that the quorum that can be there can understand what the full concerns of the board
I would
be.
encourage you, if you do, or any questions, to come directly through me.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, right, okay.
That's right, come to me.
Yes, go to Brian.
Just come to me.
Go to Brian.
Yep, and I'll be glad to represent those concerns.
Absolutely.
Yep. Good.
So the Model UN conferences for 2019 and 2020.
Yeah, we had originally invited our Model UN Club to come to the Board of Education meeting, but given the long agenda and the fact that we had to move the meeting due to graduation, I've asked them to join us in the fall instead. What they did ask for us to do here at the board meeting was to approve their trips so that they can start planning and preparing for next year. You received them on Friday in the folder. I have them here in front of me if you'd like. I'm glad to read through them. But essentially, it's 9 trips. It's similar to the schedule that our Model UN Club has had in the past. They begin on November 8th is the first trip to Brown. And then later in November, they go to William and Mary. They would continue the trip to The Hague that they've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years in January 24th to February 2nd. They go to Georgetown in February, Cornell in April, Dartmouth in April. We have a scrimmage here at the high school on September 21st, scrimmage in Greenwich, and a Saturday in the fall, and then the sophomore simulation in May. Those are single days that don't require the Board of Education's approval, but overnight trips do. So I know that Paul and his team would have liked to be here, but I also know that it would have been hard to get them here, and we knew it would be a late meeting. So they're asking your approval for those overnight trips, and I'm glad to provide more information if helpful.
Any questions? Sherry?
No, I was going to move to approve.
Okay. All those in favor?
I'm just going to abstain. I feel like I don't know enough, so.
Okay.
Well, just
All
to
right.
be, just
The
to
cost,
maybe to
fundraising.
clarify, they're gonna, I'm assuming, and advise me if I'm wrong, that, you know, we've gone over these trips in detail before with regard to student-teacher ratio and chaperone and cost.
This
and-
is a,
and financial aid and all of those policies that we have talked about over the last several years are continuing on these particular trips.
They are.
Okay.
Yes, it is
Thank you.
really, it is, they are repeating the schedule.
Yeah.
It's some new kids, but it's the same advisors. And the club is continuing, I mean, they'll come and talk about the accolades and share their feedback with you in the fall. But the club continues to be very successful and very popular with our students. We've got some middle school kids there now, you know, in that group there. And they're looking to compete as they have for the last, as I said, actually about 7 years. The board made a decision about 7 years ago to look at Model UN more as an academic sport than as a sort of a club and activity. And by doing that and making that investment, it's really changed the nature of the program and enhanced it greatly.
So, this is an incredible activity that our district does, and I just want to do a shout out to the students that do it and faculty that support it. It's one of the things about our district that make me feel so proud to sit on this Board of Ed. So thank you, because I think it's a lot of effort to take these students to all these places every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is something that I really appreciate, and I think that definitely is one group you should check in with when we're looking at the new schedule, or new potential schedule.
And they'll join us
sure.
in the fall
Yeah.
to share the year before. Yep, with the new presidents. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Next is the annual contract signature authorization.
Mhm. And this is just what it says. We do it every year. It authorizes Dr. Keating and myself to sign contracts on the board's behalf. As you know and experience, if it's a 20-year contract, there's a different process. But in the course of our work daily, there are other reasons that we need to be able to do this.
Any questions?
moved.
Okay.
Second.
Motion, second. Penny and Deanna, all those in favor?
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Is there an amount? Like, is it any amount?
No, it's, there's policies that govern, you know, the decision-making around sort of what it is and what it isn't. But all of it is discussed with the statement of accounts and the resources committee and those things. We get more specific about things. But, no, and there's not a specific, like, up to amount. There's not a specific years or things like that. It's really.
Or 20?
Right. We can use that as a guide.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I would just say, too, that it allows the administrative staff to move the district
Stop right
forward,
there.
get things done. You know, if they were always waiting for a Board of Education meeting to approve a contract, you know, their backlog would get
or any other chairman, it
ridiculous.
would
Their
take
backlog
forever.
would get ridiculous. I mean, it is you know, we do call him the CEO for a reason and the Chief Financial Officer for a reason. You know, we guide, but, you know, on day-to-day decisions, it's important to give them flexibility to
Do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Next is comments from the public.
Did we vote on that?
I thought we did. Thought we did.
Oh, we should vote.
We need to vote. We did not
We
vote.
should vote.
Just did.
Yeah, we did, on the contract.
I raised my hand and had a question.
Well, wait, and had a
question.
We did. Vote again, because
Please,
now
Did we
no,
vote?
No.
We did vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm confused, okay.
And then did we all vote?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Lisa.
Very confusing. Thank you.
What was your vote, Deanna?
I said.
All right, next up is comments from the public.
It was a little fast. Call it turn.
Again, my name is Dr. Philip Paris. I have a PhD in physics, which is relevant probably for my comments, and spend my day doing statistics so I can maybe lend some light on the survey. Recognize I only have 2 minutes, but first, I think your observation of the difficulty of analyzing the qualitative comments, given the low number of statistics, is right. Just as a quick, analysis, 54% we said supported change, 42% opposed. That's a difference of 15 percentage points, but the variance on that with 100 samples is 28%. So that basically means there's a 57% likelihood that more people prefer the change than oppose it. So 57% likelihood people prefer the change, but I wouldn't bet on that given these numbers. That said, right, I think you all have done a good job teasing out the most important aspects of the survey, which is the discrepancy or apparent discrepancy between the importance of health and wellness on the 4 change models versus the lack of importance of it on the staying the same model, right? 50% versus 25%, give or take, right? That variance is about a 99.9% significance. So people will broadly agree that all of the models are better for health and wellness if we were to make a change. The paradox comes about then when you look at the overall numbers and say, well, which change should we make, or what is supported versus opposed? There's a classic thing that you call a net promoter score. You look at the high minus the lows, develop a statistic around that. That's also inconclusive. It has a slight preference to stay the same, as I think everyone noticed, about 2 percentage points. But again, that is not really a significant thing. Maybe also about 57, 60%. So if you wanted, I think, in closing, kind of a warning, there's lies, damn lies in statistics, as I think we all know, or as Homer Simpson said it best, 45% of people know that you can make statistics say anything you want. That said, there is a way to analyze this. Typically, when you look at high-level results, you usually find inconclusive findings. However, if you were to dig into the components of it, which you've done a good job tracking, you can weight those by your priorities and by the priorities that are evident in the survey, and kind of recombine to make a statistic that would then shed more light there. Frankly, I would recommend you do that because you have created a very powerful weapon that could be used on either side of the argument to sow discord rather than to drive to consensus. And I offer my services if anybody wants, I don't charge of course, if anybody wants help, recognizing I'm just a person speaking here.
No, it's very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's late, it's June. I promise I'll be quick. I just want to start off by saying thank you to all of you for your efforts for being here in the middle of the summer doing what you do best, and that's trying to look out for our kids. So thank you to Brendan and to all of the board for your leadership and for being able to take this information and move forward with narrowing the options and further research. Deanna, I have something to say, and that is you mentioned that you're not sure, you're not convinced that changing our start times or that changing Wilton's start times really has done much for their social and emotional wellness. I only have to hypothesize here, but perhaps you're referring to the 2018 outside independent researcher that came in, Dr. Luther from Arizona State and Columbia, and actually went to Wilton High School and measured their anxiety rates. And so when you make that comparison, I'm curious if you're comparing, what data you're using to measure New Canaan's, because I'm not aware of any outside agency that we've allowed to come in to take a look at our students. So I was just curious how you're comparing, or if you're using that as a comparison. Do we have anything comparable? Have we ever brought in an outside agency to actually really look at our health and wellness and anxiety levels in our school district? Since you brought that up. I couldn't agree with you more. I love this town. I love this community. It's so unique. It's such a beautiful place to live and to raise our kids. And I couldn't agree with you more whether this goes forward in the fall and in the winter and happens, or whether this change never happens. You win some, you lose some. I love this town, and I'm so appreciative of all that has happened just to bring this issue to light, to bring the science to light, to let the doctors speak on behalf of our kids, and just to learn. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. That doesn't mean that we're going to take battle axes to each other, because we're not going to do that in this town. But I do have to say, I don't think this board is in a lose-lose situation. I would look at it more as an opportunity to really move forward with a meaningful change. You have an opportunity to really affect something great for our kids. And I think that you can take a great school district to an even greater school district. That's all. Have a nice summer, guys.
Thanks. Any other comments?
Ditto.
David Rucci. And I wasn't going to say anything. I appreciate all the efforts, and I appreciate, Brendan, you taking some leadership with this and bringing them all to bear. I just have to take an issue with bullying and saying the word bullying. First of all, I don't agree with you. And our group has done nothing but educate people the entire time. And to put out there that we're somehow bullying people is really disrespectful to myself and to our group. And I'm really upset about it, as you can probably tell. And I can tell you something else. My kid, when he was taking his test in his school, was told by his teacher, well, you guys should all want to, why would you guys want to get out of school later? That's ridiculous. So this bullying is happening throughout. And there's people in there's people in the sports groups as well, who I can't even talk to, because they're like, no, we can't have our sports times taken, you're not going to do it later. You're not going to do it later. So just don't bring up bullying. I don't think you're even allowed to say it in this high school. And it's really disappointing.
Any other comments?
Yep. Steve, I'll just be really quick. I think it's really a shame that we're putting so much weight on the survey, because there's not a single parent or student I haven't talked to about it who said it was confusing. They couldn't understand what the questions were, what they were answering, or what the point was, or what the final conclusion was. Second, surveys, opinions, whatever you want to call them, they shouldn't trump scientific studies. The science is clear. And third, if anybody has a before and after view of stress in Wilton schools, if there's an actual numbers and scientific study, please present it, because that would actually be real numbers, as opposed to saying, oh, a survey was done in Wilton 8, 9, 10 years after they changed their sleep times, their start times, and stress didn't change. We don't know that because there's no before. So if we're going to talk about Wilton, let's actually talk about real numbers. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Hello, Megan Steele. I want to thank you all. Brendan, thank you so much for your leadership. To Janie's point, whatever happens is going to happen at this point. Obviously, many of us have worked very hard to get to this point. I think you guys have been terrific. We appreciate all the hard work, Dr. Letza, you've done thus far, and obviously will continue to do. And I think Maria pointed out a working group would be something that was talked about 12 months ago, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I looked at Westport's start time committee. I think they've got 21 members, which include administrators, parents, students, teachers, just a big group. The new superintendent, we've heard nothing about Darien on this topic. I believe it was because they didn't have a super until just now. So they now have a super who comes out of Granby, and Granby has a huge late start effort underway. And again, a very significant group of people that are committed to working together. So we're all for working together. We appreciate everything you've done thus far, and I truly hope you have a great summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Next is announcements and future business.
Sure. So our next Board of Education meeting is July 15th. At that time, we will be discussing our district goals and objectives for the 2019-2020 school year. We'll also be going through a first reading for the Board of Education's schedule of meetings. And we'll also have our new administrators, our new Gary. This is Mr. Cass's final board meeting as our Director of Human Resources. Thank you, Gary.
Don't go.
Darlene will probably be sitting in the same seat, but in a different role. As our Director of Human Resources, we'll see.
We need to separate.
We'll see. We'll have to talk that through. And then Bill Tesber will be joining us as our new Director of Special Education. And so our next meeting, Bill will be coming with our new administrators of special education as well, and our interim principal for South School will be joining us as well. What else? Oh, before I'm done, I just want to say congratulations to our 5 board members who had graduates on scheduled for Tuesday, but held on Wednesday. It was well fated from the start. We had graduation right in about the 3-hour window that the rain stopped last week. And congratulations to everybody in completing another school year here in Canaan. It's amazing to think. So great stuff, and we'll see you in the middle of July. But you'll hear from me sooner because we'll have to vote on the PPA. Done.
All right. Thanks. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Sherry, second. Maria, all those in favor? Thanks.
Thanks.